June 2025. So first of all, moving on to agenda item number 1, I'd like to welcome members of the committee to the meeting, also officers and representatives from Gorum Homes, and also members of the gallery as well. Thank you for coming. The meeting is being webcast, so when you speak, please wait for use your microphones if you have them, or wait for a microphone to come to you. In case of an emergency, we're not expecting to have a fire alarm drill. So if the fire alarm does sound, please leave the room calmly via the lobby area and the main front door of City Hall, turn right and walk down the ramp towards the cathedral. The assembly point is in front of the cathedral. Agenda item number 2, apologies for absence and substitutions. Councillor Townsend has sent apologies. Councillor Sabalala is substituting. Welcome, Sibs. Are there any other apologies or substitutions? I think. All right, thank you. Agenda item 3 is declarations of interest. I'm going to ask committee members if there are any interest to declare in relation to the items of business on the agenda, and any interest declared will be recorded in the minutes. I'll start myself. I am a trustee of the Bristol Museum Development Trust, which relates to the final item on today's agenda. Do I have any other declarations of interest? Councillor Mack?
Yeah, I'm the non-executive director for Bristol Holdings, which relates to the items on Gorum business plan.
Thank you. Councillor McAllister?
Thank you. I was previously a member of the Western Harbour Advisory Group, which may have some bearing on the Gorum Homes issues.
Okay, thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, moving on to agenda item number 4, which is minutes of the previous meeting. I'd like to move the minutes of the meeting of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee held on 19th of May as a correct record. Can I ask for somebody to second that?
Seconded.
Can I ask the committee if they are content to confirm the minutes as correct record? Okay, thank you. Okay, agenda item number 5 is Chair's announcements. There are 2 items on this committee meeting that include exempt items. If we need to discuss any of the exempt information, we will need to move into a private session. What we'll do is, rather than move the members of the public, we will move into a separate room and then return back to this in this room to make any decisions in public. The other item I'd like to advise the committee is that, in addition to the agenda items listed for this meeting, we have agreed, in accordance with Constitution Law APR 16, access to information procedures, along with the Vice Chair, myself, the Vice Chair, the Monitoring Officer, and Section 151 Finance Officer, that an urgent item of business can be considered at this meeting. The urgent item is a report about fundraising and bidding for the acquisition of an oil painting, The Rising Squall Hot Wells, by JMW Turner for Bristol Museum Art Galleries for their collections. The report has been published alongside the agenda papers for this meeting. We now move on to agenda item number 6, which is public forum. We have up to 30 minutes available for public forum. There are 10 public questions. Questions 1, 2 and 3 are from Martin Rands regarding Gorum Homes. Is Martin here with us? Okay, Martin would have received written answers to his question. Question number 4, 5 and 6 is from Jen Smith. Jen, I can see you here. Do you have any follow-up questions?
Okay, you had to bear with me because I haven't had the answers very long. So I have a follow-up question to my second question about complaints, which I believe there's no monitoring of how long a complaint goes through the system. Is that right? So if my follow-up question is, how do you know that your complaints are being responded to at all? Because I've got a stage 1 complaint about the send spying that's been completely ignored. So how's the council going to monitor what's going on? Because it's just like another process that people are being ignored through. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I think that's a very valid point there. Maybe it's something we should be looking at about what our ability is to track how long those decisions being taken to respond to. So I'll follow that up for you.
Hello? I also have a supplementary question, which, is it my third question? Which was, yeah. So Bristol City Council paid me off to make the spying they were doing go away. They are also fully aware that I have released evidence online to back up every one of my statements. So how can the council claim in this answer with any honesty that it's unaware of officers monitoring online activity? Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. I mean, I can only say the response to that was provided was one that I was sort of was correct. I can ask for further clarification on that for you.
Hello? It's just like, this has been going on years. We were spied on in 2021 and it's 2025, yeah? Why is this, why don't you want to do anything about it? You literally, campaigned on it. You electioneered on it. There was Green councillors in this hall all going on about how terrible Labour is, but you are there, sat there right now, covering it up, aren't you?
Jen, you've asked your questions. I've tried to give you an answer. I would send you an answer in writing and then you can read that out in public as well. Questions 7 and 8 are from Professor John Tartan. Is John Tartan in?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we haven't had long to respond to the answers. We only got them about 2 hours ago, but I'll do my best. Gorum Homes now claims that external circumstances beyond their control have resulted in a worsening financial viability for this development, as indicated by a Red Loft report published on the 5th of June 2025. The projected loss of 9.8 million casts doubts on their capacity to deliver the 40% affordable homes as required by planning policy and agreed prior to the granting of planning permission. What Goram fails to mention is that this report is no
John,
worse.
you're making a statement. Can you ask the question?
Yes, there will be a question, yeah. What Goram fails to mention is that this report is no worse than that published on May 2023, which projected a loss of 10.2 million. We raised this at the planning meeting in April 2024. And economy and skills meeting.
If you're making a statement, then this is not really a follow-up question, is it? Can you ask your question, please?
Thank you. On each occasion, our concerns were dismissed. Does the committee agree that to misrepresent the change in financial circumstances in order to modify planning conditions or to obtain a grant from Homes England would be unethical and possibly illegal?
I cannot answer on behalf of the committee. This matter will be going to a planning committee. You can ask your questions there, but of the people, you'll be making a decision. Do you have another follow-up question for your other question? And please, John, can you make this a question rather than a statement?
Okay. Sometimes you have to have a bit of a preamble. There's been a catalogue of irregularities associated with the Baltic Wharf development, of which I could go into at great length, including the NPPF definition of brownfield site.
John, please don't go into great length. Just ask the follow-up question.
I'll stay within a minute. Thank you. It now seems that development will lose considerable money and possibly lose 40% affordable homes. Is it time to pause this development and consider alternatives, such as allowing the popular and valuable caravan park to continue earning revenue for Bristol, or to turn this wooded area into a much-needed public park and play area? We consider either option provides a better outcome for the people of Bristol, and the money saved could be better spent.
John, I think you've asked the question. You're now making the argument in favour of it. John, you've asked your question. You then need to pause to allow a response. The question you're asking is a question that will go to the planning committee and for the planning committee to decide whether to proceed with the planning application. That's why we allow statements. Okay, question number 9 is from Jill Tartan. Is Jill here? And Jill, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. I am upset by your answer to my question about the trees and affordable homes, because it shows you didn't tell the truth a year ago when you promised you'd identify the sites for the trees within a few weeks. Now you're saying you've got to wait for the 162 sites to be surveyed. We know they don't exist anyway, and until you've got the money to do it. Anyway, the worry is that in 2014 we had a similar situation with the Metro bus development, and 10 years afterwards the council applied to have the condition removed because tree sites could not be identified. My question now is simply, regarding the affordable homes, can this committee guarantee categorically that this development will not proceed if the required and promised 50 social rented properties and 16 shared ownership properties are not delivered on this site?
And again, that is a question for the planning committee to consider. The questions you're asking, most of them are questions for the planning committee. I hope you will submit those questions to the planning committee when it stands. Thank you. Question number 10 is from Anne Hughes-Devereux. Do you have a follow-up, please?
Sort of, yes. I'll try to not make a statement. As we were, the original thing was going to be provided with affordable homes, and now that seems to have been let down with this. How are we going to? Why can't we do a park for this area instead of the houses, when it's actually only going to be expensive waterfront houses, flats rather?
Okay, my understanding of the planning application is that planning application will include at least 66 affordable homes. So on that basis, that's why the planning is being taken forward, because I'm sure most of the people in this chamber recognise we have a desperate need for affordable housing. However, again, that would be a question for the planning committee to decide whether they're satisfied with the proposals coming forward. Thank you. We also have a public statement, and that's from Suzanne Audrey. Suzanne.
Thank you. This committee has responsibility for democratic engagement. Public consultation is an important part of democratic engagement. I'm sure we all know there have been problems with Bristol City Council consultations in recent years, Western Harbour and East Bristol livable neighbourhood being examples. Some of these problems seem to relate to the ways in which the views of the public are taken into consideration when they're not in line with the preferred option of officers or members. Currently, the public engagement report for South Bristol livable neighbourhood, which I know exists, is not available to the public, and in particular to the people of South Bristol. But ARUP have seen it, and they are developing interventions. Please, will you publish the report, learn from previous mistakes, keep the public informed, and ensure their views are treated with respect? Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Obviously, what you submitted was a public statement, but what I'll respond is by saying I've spoken to the chair of the Transport and Connectivity Policy Committee, who is responsible for the delivery of the livable neighbourhood in South Bristol, and he has reassured me that the report will be made public as soon as possible. Thank you. That concludes public forum. We now move on to agenda item number 7, which is the Gorum Homes pipeline review for 25-26. Can I advise the committee that this report provides an update on the pipeline of housing development sites approved for allocation to Gorum Homes, the council's wholly owned housing company. The report also seeks approval for a delegation to the Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration, in consultation with the Executive Director of Housing, the Chair of the Committee and the Director of Finance to add or delete sites from the pipeline where appropriate. This is a key decision as it involves spend over £500,000 and has a significant impact on more than 2 wards. I would like to invite Louise Davison, Head of Housing Delivery, to outline the report. Louise.
Thank you, Chair. And good afternoon, members of Strategy and Resources Committee. This is the first annual update on the Gorum's Home pipeline that was previously scrutinised and approved at Cabinet in years gone by. The paper, as the Chairman says, seeks to formally establish the Gorum pipeline, providing Gorum with certainty over the sites they are to work up towards delivery in 25-26 and beyond. It should be noted, though, that the paper does not seek to approve any disposals of the individual sites, nor establish any key outcomes for each site. That will be dealt with at a site-by-site basis. The pipeline of sites, as proposed, feeds directly into the Gorum business plan, which we're going to consider at committee in the item after this one. There are two significant changes to the previous Cabinet papers in the pipeline paper being presented today. The first, as the Chair has just said, is seeking the approval of a delegation to our Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration in consultation with the Executive Director for Housing and the Chair of Strategy Resources Policy Committee, and Director of Finance. And that is to add or delete sites from that pipeline of housing development where appropriate. This will enable Gorum and the Council to proactively manage the Gorum pipeline as opportunities arise in the city, or if sites are discovered to have significant challenges for Gorum and are better delivered elsewhere. The second amendment, actually, compared to previous years, is that we have included a commitment against each site in the pipeline of the activity that Gorum is going to undertake in this financial year. And when we come back to committee in future opportunities, we'll be able to tell you what the progress has been on those sites. So we'll start to see the incremental growth, if you like, of the work we're doing to bring sites forward. We've also got two changes from last year to the sites within the pipeline. The first is to remove the site at Dovercourt Gasworks from the pipeline. During the last year, Gorum have carried out a lot of due diligence on that site and have understood that there's significant site constraints which are going to significantly reduce the residential capacity of the land in question. And that no longer works for Gorum's model of delivery. So we've gone down from something like a 70-unit scheme to something that might deliver around 40 to 50 homes because of constraints on the site. We're now going to look at further options to bring that site forward with either ourselves or a development partner in the future. The second change from last year's programme is to bring Plot 5 Bedminster Green into the Gorum pipeline. This is a site within the Bedminster regeneration area that hasn't progressed under its current arrangements. And Gorum will be working collaboratively with the regeneration and housing delivery teams to develop proposals for the site going forward. I'm joined today by Steve Baker from Gorum, and either of us will happily answer questions around the pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. So do I have any comments or questions? Tom Bleckinsop.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for that report. I will confess that I don't necessarily know all of the schemes that are going into the pipeline, so I was hoping to ask a few questions. I understand you know, that it says we're not going to discuss the details of it, but for example, with the gasworks, you mentioned there are significant constraints going on. Could you give us a little bit more of an elaboration on what those significant constraints are?
I have my notes, if you give me 2 seconds. Scrolling down. I've got, sorry, here we go. Right, sorry. So yes, so when we handed the site over to Gorum to look at, we were expecting around a site that could deliver around 72 units. The utility surveys in particular have shown that there are multiple constraints on the site, including gas easements, which all require a 3-metre buffer zone, significant risk of contamination. There's a strategic sewer and an additional buffer zone that's required to that, which would need to be retained. And diversion of that just would prove the site unviable and include the requirement for third-party land. So basically what we've seen as we've looked at the site is a shrinking of the land that's available for development for residential. We will continue to work on what the options are for that site going forward.
Follow up on that, what's the existing use of the site as it currently stands then? Is it a brownfield site?
It's currently a vacant brownfield site. There is currently a planning application on there for a meanwhile van dwellers use, which we would look at maintaining until the site comes forward for residential or other development.
Okay, I'll ask one more then. So this is not on the gasworks, but again, I don't know that much around Bedminster Green. And it notes that delivery proposals will have a developer install the council's extricating from existing arrangements from land disposal. If I can find the bit later on, we're looking at viability testing, initial design work and so on. So did we have a deal in place with Bedminster Green, and what's happened with that site in particular? Because again, that was just one where I was unclear on what was going on.
I think the current work at the moment is to actually close the arrangements we've got with the existing developer who is looking at the site, and then over the next year working with Gorum to look at the art of the possible.
Okay. What was there a particular reason why we pulled away from that developer, or?
The agreement to terminate the development agreement was reached at Strategy and Resources Committee in November. So the rationale was set out in that committee.
Fair enough.
Tom. Hello, Tom.
Thank you. I actually thought I'd start with Baltic Wharf, because although I don't actually think it's just for the planning committee, because what they're raising to material to both this item and also the business plan item. So I think the place I just wanted to start was just to understand, you've submitted a Section 73 application, which is to take the affordable housing that will be secured through Section 106 to zero. Is that correct? We'll come on to the sovereign bit, but I just want to check that I've got that correct.
So we've submitted a Section 73 application to allow grant to be able to come into the scheme. So there are technicalities around moving it from Section 106 housing development into with grant, and that's what the Section 73 seeks to do.
So that would take it to zero, and then in the hope grant will replace.
So it doesn't remove the affordable housing, and I think it's important to make clear that we're not looking to remove affordable housing from the development. We're looking to maintain levels of affordable housing and keep it at 40%. So the Act is not for us to seek to remove the affordable housing. The Act is to enable us to bring grant in and maintain the affordable housing at the same level.
Yeah, no, I understand that's not what you're trying to do, but I just want to be clear from technical perspective. The Section 106 requirement will go to zero. Is that correct?
There will be no subsidy-free affordable housing on the development moving forward.
Yeah, so it will go to zero, and then you'll replace that with grant funding for fears offering.
My answer stays the same as it was previously, that we'll maintain it at the same level.
That's fine. So with Sovereign, is it secured, that agreement? Have you now signed a deal with Sovereign?
So at the moment, the Section 73 is in the planning process. We have an agreed position with Sovereign. We are still working through the legals to be able to say that we're in contract, but that is the process at the moment. So we're seeking to get into contract in the next few weeks, and that is our aim, to secure that before we go to planning committee in July.
Okay. It also says, again, this is the reason I'm picking this up, it's just in part of the public forum, it says Sovereign will also be looking to obtain further grant funding from the Homes England Bridge funding, and therefore confident grant funding will be available for the project. So have they got the funding in place that they need to enter into the agreement? I just want to check that.
I don't want to not answer the question, but the arrangements that Sovereign would have with Homes England are arrangements that they would be privy to, not myself.
You're not in a position to comment on this?
I don't.
Fair enough. Okay. That's kind of my Baltic Wharf questions. I think Hengrove, just be good to understand a bit more about where we're up to with the latest phase and what's happening with the affordable housing on that site.
So the main master plan, so if we talk about the areas, not the bookends that started on site. So we are negotiating with the selected partner, as we previously shared. So Vistry Group are underway with the work that we're doing to bring that forward. We're expecting to be able to conclude our commercial negotiations within the next 2 to 3 months. We'll then form a limited liability partnership and commence later this financial year. It's still our intent to move forward as planned. It's taken a little bit longer than we'd expected. We're looking at some innovative financing arrangements with Homes England, who've been very supportive of the development, and we're really excited to be able to start as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you. So I think the reason we're obviously quite keen to scrutinise particularly those two sites, because they were sites that were removed from the council housing pipeline via a behind closed doors discussion. Appreciate it's not for you to comment on this, Stephen. So, you know, it's of concern to us about what's now happening. So it sounds like there might be progress at Baltic Wharf, but Hengrove has slipped. And I think this just brings me on to a final point, that we do want to table an amendment today to the recommendations, and we'd like to propose to delete the second recommendation, because we don't think that the delegations, the site should come here. to add or remove. This committee meets monthly. And so it shouldn't be too much of a problem for things to come here if sites need to be added or removed, so that we've got a transparent approach to Gorum Homes. So I'd like to formally move an amendment to remove that second recommendation.
Well, when we get to the point where we move the motions, you're more than welcome to make your amendment. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Blenkinsop.
This one is just around the SS Great Britain car park, and I just wanted to ask again just about the delivery plan. Obviously, I'm not as familiar with the Harbourside area as a certain other councillor who's here as well, but I do know it reasonably well, and that area has a lot of housing development already going on that's not being completed. It would be good to know what work has already been done to understand it, because I think we are getting quite decent revenue out of the SS Great Britain and the car park. Tourism is vital to the area, to the city, so it would be good to know what the plan was to not push too hard on that, while just a bit more on the delivery plan would be good to know.
Thank you. So what we've done to date is we've looked at a capacity study for the site. So we've worked out what is the art of the possible. You've already highlighted, Tom, that there's a requirement to talk to the Trust about car parking. So there have been a number of changes at the SS Great Britain Trust recently, and I met with the new chief exec in the last 3 months, maybe 6, and he has explained to me that they're on a programme of forming their long-term plan. And what we said is that at the moment there's no immediate plans for us to take forward the redevelopment of the car park, and we'll maintain dialogue with the SS Great Britain Trust and work together and see how their plans emerge for their future use of the car park. But for now, it's not on our immediate pipeline of work that we'll be doing in the next 12 months.
Okay, thank you. That's a very reassuring answer.
Councillor McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. Just since lots of these Harbourside schemes are coming up for discussion, I thought I'd chip in as the Harbourside councillor. On the SS Great Britain, it's a good point you're raising, Councillor Blenkinsop. The Trust are quite open to discussions. They just want to make sure that their access of visitors to their site is protected, and they would be very happy for that to be done by a public transport hub or so on. In terms of revenue that the council gets from the site, we'd probably get more on council tax from a housing development than we do from the car park. But this is all very much sort of further down in the pipeline, and we don't really know any specifics yet. So it's a bit hard to make judgments on it, in my view, at this point. On Baltic Wharf, I do have regular meetings with Gorum Homes about this, and appreciating the controversy of the planning application at the time, but that has happened at this point. So my priority is making sure that obligations do get fulfilled. The first question I ask in every meeting is the 40% affordable housing delivery secure? And every time the answer is yes, and we are working to bring forward this funding to enable it to happen. So as a local councillor, I am reassured on the affordable housing perspective there.
Okay, any more comments or questions? Councillor Sabalala.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, on a positive note, it's really great story and success, I guess, to see that partnership for Baltic Wharf and Hengrove going towards that limited partnership. I wonder what lessons we can learn from that in terms of other large-scale projects across the city. So that's question one. My other part to that is, obviously, with any of these large-scale projects, there's a deficit towards the general fund, especially where there's land transfer or any of those issues. How are we currently mitigating the HRA kind of funds for any of these current pipeline? Thanks.
You do the second bit and I'll do the first bit.
You do the first bit first then.
I'll do the first bit first, apparently. So lessons learned for sites across the city. I think the most important lesson that we've learned is understand your partners. So we are entering into partnership arrangements. I think it's really important that you understand who you're partnering with and where your aims and objectives align. So it's very difficult to enter into a partnership if you're both looking to achieve very different things. Gorum is set up as a commercial organisation, so it's easy for us to align with commercial organisations we enter into partnership with, but also take the values that we are set out in the objectives that the council have for us and blend them into our arrangements so that we're getting the best of the commercial world and protecting the public purse. So I think it's important that you understand your partners. That takes an enormous amount of work from our perspective and has taken a great number of years. But those relationships are key with these partnership type arrangements, but transfer across all types of projects.
Thank you. And picking up on the point about land and investment, so all of the sites that are going to Gorum at the moment are general fund sites, and we will be receiving a full market value, independently assessed market value, on whether that's for a harbour site like Baltic Wharf, where that value comes at the point of disposal, or whether that's a wider piece of general fund land when we have a loan note and we get the value of that land back in stages. The point is we still do get the full value back for that piece of land.
Any more questions, comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Just a final comment. It's really good to see the progress that Gorum Homes has made over the last few years. You know, now on site at several schemes. One not least seems to be making really brilliant progress in particular, and I'm pleased that HRA will be taking the affordable housing units, but also understand you've done a further deal for some further affordable housing on there, which is really good to see. And so, you know, I just hope we'll continue to support Gorum Homes to move forward, develop more schemes, bring more homes forward, hopefully at a bit of a quicker pace ideally, but I'll save some comments for the business managers to understand some of that. So I think, you know, it should be commended how far you've come, because it has not been easy. It has been a long journey. So, you know, I just want to pass on my thanks and well done to you and the team for all the work you've done today.
Thanks, Tom.
Being a comment I'll add as well is Gorum Homes is obviously our arm's length housing company, and we use Gorum Homes where possible because the way Gorum Homes works allows us to increase the number of homes we're able to bring forward that are affordable, and by affordable I particularly mean social housing. Obviously we would like to have an increased proportion of that being council housing, but we are at the moment facing demands to install quite correct demands to install out our council housing is brought up to the standard it needs to be for our tenants and to improve how we operate as a landlord. But council housing and social housing is very important, particularly given that we have 22,000 households on the waiting list, 1,600 households in temporary accommodation, and however much I may appreciate concerns about the loss of trees at Baltic Wharf, I think the ugliest thing in the city is seeing people without a home that meets their needs. Any other questions or comments before we go to the vote? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the original proposer and ask for a seconder, and then at that point, if you want to move an amendment, you're welcome to do so. So, for the clarity of the committee and for the benefit of any members of the public present, the recommendations are that the Committee for Strategy and Resources, 1, approves the Gorum Homes Pipeline Review 2025-2026 report, including the removal of the Dovercourt Gasworks site and the inclusion of Plot 5 Bemster Green in the pipeline. And secondly, approves delegation to the Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration in consultation with the Executive Director for Housing, the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee, and the Director of Finance to add or delete sites from the pipeline of housing development sites where appropriate. Do I have a seconder?
Seconded.
Do I have any amendments?
Please can I propose as an amendment to delete Officer Recommendation 2, which starts approved delegation to the Exec Director, Growth and Regeneration. Hope you don't need me to read the whole thing out.
Okay, do you have a seconder? All those in favour of the amendment, please raise your hands. All those against, please raise your hands. Any abstentions, please raise your hands. That amendment falls. So we now move back to a vote on the original motion.
Can I make a point of order? Can we vote on the recommendation separately?
There's just two. I mean,
yeah, I know, but we don't support one, so I'd like to vote for the one I do support. Which is
okay,
to
I
approve the
wouldn't want
pipeline.
to upset your press release, so yeah, we'll do it separately.
I haven't got a press release written, actually, Councillor Dyer.
I'm sure you can write one afterwards, I will be. So I propose that the Committee for Strategy and Resources 1 approves the Gorum Homes Pipeline Review 2025-26 report, including the removal of the Dovercourt Gasworks site and the inclusion of Plot 5 Bedminster Green in the pipeline. Do I have a seconder for that motion?
Seconded.
All those in favour, please show your hands. That's passed unanimously. I now like to move the motion that the Committee for Strategy and Resources approves delegation to the Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration in consultation with the Executive Director for Housing, the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee and the Director of Finance to add or delete sites on the pipeline of housing development sites where appropriate. Can I have a seconder for that?
Seconded.
All those in favour, please raise your hands. All those against, please raise your hands. That passes 6 votes to 3. Thank you. Okay. My apologies, I forgot we also had 2 items to note as well. So can I ask that the committee notes the update on the current status of each site previously approved for allocation to the Gorum Homes pipeline, as set out in Appendix A1, and notes that the disposal of sites referred to in Appendix A1 are Baltic Wharf, car park adjacent to SS Great Britain, A and B Bond, the Grove car park, and Western Harbour will be subject to agreement by the Harbour Authority.
Thank you.
Can I take that as noted? Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item number 8, which is the Gorum Homes business plan for 25-26. This report seeks approval of the Gorum Homes business plan 25-26 and is a key decision as it has a significant impact on more than 2 wards. I would like to invite Claire Jeffrits, Shareholder Liaison Manager, to outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. As you may be aware, this approval of the business plan is part of an annual process for all of our wholly owned subsidiaries. The business plans of Bristol Holding and Bristol Waste were approved in March, and today before you is the Gorum Homes business plan for 25-26 and onwards. Before colleagues from Gorum talk you through that plan, I just wanted to set out the governance process that these plans get through before they come to here. So the process begins in summer when we set out strategic objectives in discussion with the companies that will set their direction of travel for the years ahead. There's then a framework for the business plan developed in the autumn, setting out key facts that will be driven into the business plan, and then the full business plans follow in the month that follows. They go through each of the boards, they go through the company's assurance meeting, which is a key assurance meeting for the council shareholder, and then they go to the shareholder group for final consideration before onward travel to here. The commentary from each of those assurance parties is also noted in your reports for transparency. So I'll now hand over to Gorum colleagues who will talk you through their plan.
Thank you. I'm the chair of Gorum Homes. My name is Aman Dalvi, and chair, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. I'll just take a minute to talk about myself. I have worked in the housing sector for over 40 years. My experience spans from both the public and the private sector. I worked for Homes England as Assistant Director of Investment. I was an Executive Director of Planning in a local authority, a Chief Executive of a local authority, a Chief Executive of a housing association, and a Chief Executive of an economic development agency. So my grey hair will testify that I have been around for a while. In the private sector, I worked for Canary Wharf Group and a couple of other developers as well. I was also appointed by the Secretary of State to serve on the boards of the National Regeneration Agency, English Partnerships, and the Olympic Park Legacy Company. And at present, I'm the Deputy Chair of the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation, which is the largest regeneration project in the country and arguably in Europe. Local authorities, like all public bodies, face very challenging times with financial pressures, and they are getting worse. Housing is no different. Bristol faces challenges in reinvesting in its own stock. It has to meet all of the compliance demands like building safety, fire safety, and repairs and maintenance. The housing revenue account is drained by meeting these demands, not simply in Bristol, but all over the country. As the chair mentioned, Bristol's housing demand is onerous, with 22,000 households on the council's waiting list, and importantly, 1,600 people in temporary accommodation. The problem is that the supply is slow, and it is slow because there has been national underinvestment. Recently, the government has improved this program, but it's going to take time to work its way through. Gorum Homes was set up to address the supply issues. We are owned by the council, but we work with the private sector to unlock council land and to provide affordable housing for sale. Affordable housing for rent and for sale. We are able to develop complex sites for social rent and for low-cost homeownership. We also work with the council to meet the needs of children who need care and for the needs of the elderly as well. I'm pleased to present the business plan of Gorum Homes today. The plan highlights our commitment and drive to build much-needed new homes and to deliver a share of the profit back to the council as well. So with that, I'll hand over to my Managing Director, Steve.
Thank you, Aman. In constructing this business plan this year, it really has been a collaborative process working with the council's teams who have been incredibly supportive and passionate as we are about delivering much needed homes. We can only start to meet the housing challenges by working together, and this business plan is a great example of joint working. Our objectives, which we won't go through line by line, as you've already seen in the plan, have been agreed alongside council officers over the last few months and are very similar to the ones in the previous business plan. This is to make sure that we as the council's wholly owned housing company can best support the council's needs over the coming months and years. Aman has mentioned this critical work as it reflects the council's affordable housing delivery plan for 25-27 and the 25-27 corporate strategy. Our current pipeline, which Louise presented earlier, totals just over 3,000 homes to be built in the coming year, half of which we target to be affordable housing. The business plan for the coming year highlights our aim to build around 1,000 homes across 6 development sites. Half of these will be affordable housing for social rent and shared ownership. We're making great progress towards this, with over 600 homes already being built across 4 sites, and families already living in one Lockleys, both as homeowners and as council tenants. In this business plan, we will continue to build at one Lockleys, a development site on Dovercourt Road that we refer to as the Brooklands, and New Fossway Road, which we have referred to as the Fossway in our development plans in Hengrove. We'll complete new apartment blocks at 53 number homes at Dundry View in Hengrove. This is the first phase of the master plan development area that Tom referenced earlier, which will be circa 1,435 in total when complete. Baltic Wharf we would aim to commence later in the year, with the first phase of Hengrove, as I mentioned, due to complete soon. The business plan sets out our ambition to start the design work across 4 sites. This may change as the year moves forward, but it's important that we set out clear and deliverable plans for ourselves as an organisation. We plan to work on Abond on the harbour side, and the former St Ursula's school site in Westbury-on-Trim, and the second phase of Hengrove, as I've already mentioned, and Bellstone Walk site at Novus Hill. We're excited to bring new projects forward this year, and as covered in the pipeline paper, the council has also asked us to look at Plot 5 in Bedminster Green. We'll start by meeting with local community and spending time learning about the site and the area before we take plans forward. And we've already been in touch with ward councillors to start that process. The business plan sets out our commitment to build sustainable homes. We are targeting net zero housing across our sites, helping us to maintain minimum requirements on fossil fuels and trying to reduce our impact on the environment as much as possible. We are also supporting communities in which we build, and I'm proud to say we have now trained over 500 people at our One Lockley Skills Academy, kickstarting many careers in construction. And I hope you've been able to note in our business plan some of the stories of the people who've gone through the Skills Academy. Our focus is on delivery, and we work with award-winning national house builders to get homes built as quickly as we can. Of course, we will work with our commercial partners in the market as much as to influence by macroeconomic factors. It is therefore right that we will monitor the industry and economic changes closely and reforecast housing delivery when we need to manage construction in what can be a volatile market. We balance delivering a profit back to the council with building much needed affordable housing that will have wide-ranging positive impacts on our city. We're incredibly passionate about this challenge and proud that half of the homes we're currently building are affordable housing for social rent and shared ownership. Our procurement status, being outside of public procurement rules, means we can secure innovative deals to get high-quality, sustainable homes built with the appropriate levels of affordable housing. Our developments are usually structured through joint venture partnerships with home builders, both investment and financing being shared, and I've referred to those as limited liability partnerships earlier. Our joint venture model with partners enables us to deliver sustainable land value and significant proportions of profits back to Bristol City Council once homes are sold. The council can then decide how profits are best spent. This year we are forecasting to deliver our first profits after tax, and for a cumulative net result should become positive in 27-28. Thank you once again to the members and council officers and to the Gorum Homes team who have worked tirelessly to get new homes built. We know how much a warm, safe, good quality home can transform a life, and we'll continue to work hard to build homes for Bristol. Thank you, and back to you guys for the questions.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Blenkinsop and then Councillor Gillandris.
Thank you very much. I think we've got some really good stuff in here, some really ambitious stuff in here. So I'm going to ask a devil's advocate question to begin with. We've got really ambitious targets when it comes to affordable homes, to building quite a lot, and we also have very ambitious targets when it comes to the environment, which is absolutely the right approach and something I find laudable. But are those squared up against each other, considering the restrictions that will be in place, the effort that we're going to make the environmental side of things? Are you confident in the cumulative home completions target on page 67?
So when we formulate the business plan is based on a number of forecasts. So it is not a list of absolutely everything to the single digit that will be delivered in a number of years forecast forward. We've seen nationally and locally in Bristol that building homes is incredibly difficult. So what we need to do is do our very best to forecast with our partners, and that's what we've sought to do in the business plan. I suspect there will be a degree of change between this year's plan and when we look at it again next year. That is just a product of the type of business that we're in, where it is a forecast, not something that we can absolutely control in terms of finite single-digit numbers. But our intent is to build as fast as we possibly can do. That's been part of our objective since day one as an organisation, since we were formed, was to build at pace, and that is our intention, and we'll continue to do that.
I mean, I'm certainly not asking you to specify it down to the number. That would be a little bit unfair. But in terms of the forecast, the predictions we've got going forward, that we will be heading up, I can see the trend on the graph. You're roughly saying that around there, you're confident in around. Based
on the information that we have today, barring any external macroeconomic factors that might change our assumptions that we have today, that is our projection for where we will be at the end of the plan period.
Given the government has recently announced quite a substantial increase, I think in the region of around 39 billion, I'll be correct if I'm wrong, in terms of additional funding for affordable housing, would that be a kind of macroeconomic development that might be factored into the forecasting? I'm going to guess that's not part of the forecasting as it stands at the moment.
unfortunately not because of the nature of when we start the process of building the business plan. We're really excited about the announcement of more affordable homes funding coming through Homes England. I mentioned earlier that we have active dialogue directly and indirectly through the council with Homes England, and we're really excited to be able to support Homes England and the government in delivering as much affordable housing as we can.
Can I ask one last question on that point? So we talk a lot about affordable housing, but obviously affordable housing has slightly different meanings in slightly different contexts. And obviously with the situation at Baltic Wharf and Hengrove, affordable housing that had planned to be council housing was then subsequently for housing associations. And I'm curious to know, because I don't think it was specified, I may have missed in the report, and if so I apologise, but I don't think it was specified how much of this would end up in the hands of the council. And I was wondering if you could give me an estimate on that number.
Are you after a number of how many of the affordable homes in our total plan would be council housing? Yes. We don't do that within the plan because each scheme comes forward and is available to the council. And if the council wish or are unable to fund that affordable housing, that will go out to the market. So I'm not in a position to be able to forecast that because I don't have visibility on the HRA's budget.
No, thank you for clarifying on that point, that's a political decision for us, I suppose. Thank you very much. That's all from me for now.
I would say, Tom, is sometimes not so much a political decision, there also has to be a financial decision. But as you said, the £39 billion of additional investment that's been announced in the comprehensive spending review will be very welcome. Obviously, we're still awaiting clarity about how much that will come down to Bristol, but every extra helps. Councillor Gillandris.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen, thank you very much for what's been achieved to date. I echo Tom Reynard's comments. It's a big achievement. We desperately need more houses, and anything that delivers more housing, particularly social housing, affordable housing, whatever you want to call it, is a bonus for Bristol. So that's really good news. I'd like to have a quick look at page 32 of your business plan, and in particular the projected profit and loss figures. Now, in my previous career, I've seen many fortunes come and go in residential property development. It's a high-risk area. Now, we are projecting, or you are projecting, the first profit in the coming 12 months for 25-26. Really important, because otherwise the whole pack of cards can collapse. Obviously, you're monitoring that very carefully. I think as a committee, the one thing we would need to know and have an assurance that if that profit figure that you're projecting isn't going to happen, I think we would need early advice of that, early warning of it. Is that something you can commit to?
Yes. So the way that we share information is we are regularly sharing information with the council. That information is shared on a monthly basis with the finance function, and then it then moves into reporting within the shareholder group. I'm not then quite sure of the flow from the shareholder group into this group, but the information is absolutely shared with the council. So there are forward forecast projections of where our finances sit as a business. So it's not an annual process where we're going away working on our own and then coming back once a year. So we're regularly sharing information with the council.
Thank you, and good luck in achieving those figures.
Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stephen and Aman, for your reports and presentations today. It's been extremely helpful, and actually thank you, Stephen, for all the extra briefings I've had as the local councillor for several of these. I wanted to ask a question on the Bristol holding commentary appendix, please. Point 2.6 regarding the pre-tax profit that Gorum will be returning to the council, nearly £500,000 in 25-26 and 4.1 million by 28-29. Echoing Councillor Glandris, that would be amazing if it happened, and I hope it does. Can I just check, is the pre-tax profit, is that distinct from repayment to the council of the loans that the council grants it, or is it the same thing?
I'm going to defer to Chris, our CFO, to answer that question.
They are completely distinct. The loans are managed separately from any profit decision that is made by council.
Thank you. So my follow-up to that is great that we're getting that Gorham's expecting to generate that profit and amazing that it's coming back to the council. I'm wondering, because this is pre-tax profit, and I'm assuming Gorum has tax liabilities like any other corporation, would it be more efficient, as in we'd keep less, less money would get lost to a taxation system, if Gorum was to reinvest that money instead into future projects and therefore have a lower profit margin, but we'd be able to keep the money in the system and reinvest into buying more houses, building more houses, and so on?
Okay, I'll answer that one. The figures quoted in the business plan package that's attached are post-tax, and I think that the distribution of profit and how it's managed is open for discussion every year. So when we're in a position that we have profits, it will be for council/shareholder to tell us how they wish to invest, and that will be subject to the circumstances council face at the time, tax legislation at the time. So it's a dynamic decision for council to make at the time.
Okay. Councillor Reynolds.
Just to build on that before I move on to some other questions, obviously some of it's done via loan notes, isn't it? So there's also an income. So one lot lease is the example, is we'll get an income from that for the land, and then there's a decision for the council in how it then allocates that fund, whether that's back into affordable housing. We tabled an amendment which fell in the budget process earlier in the year to take some of that money to put into children's homes to bring more kids back from out of area and keep our kids local, because it also costs us a fortune, but it's been quite a bad thing. So there'll be decisions there. I just want to check I've got my understanding correct on that, and that's separate from perhaps from some of these figures.
So what was your question? It was about whether there or not there are loan notes.
So we'll get money back for the land, won't we, as a council?
Yeah, I mean, I think you were aware, the structure of for us to acquire is often through loan note instrument. So that is, to try and make the language a little bit simpler, very similar to a mortgage that you might have if you were acquiring a house yourself. But we have it with the council, so it's a loan, and we will repay that loan, including interest, and that stays the same.
Yeah, thank you. The next bit I wanted to just pick on was the skills academies. That's obviously, it's been a really brilliant thing. It's something that we championed, Labour administration, when it came forward on one of these. I wonder if you could just share a bit more information about some of the success stories that have come out of the skills academies.
I'd actually like to ask my colleague Vicky, who's been fortunate enough to meet more of the people herself, but my own experiences has been amazing, and we want to repeat it and definitely look at doing it in South Bristol.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for your question, Tom. We have now trained more than 500 people at the Skills Academy in One Lockleys, and some of them are people that are referred to us from the job centre. So they're either unemployed or they're earning less than the minimum wage. Some of them have worked in the industry before and they're desperate to get back in. Others are completely new to construction. And what it does is it provides a construction skills certificate which enables that person to then work on site, and that's a completely free training course. So we know that the majority of those people have actually gone into employment, and without that free training, they would have been stuck in the system, unable to access work. So it's been a real success, and we're keen to replicate it across other developments as well.
It's brilliant, and I hope it does come forward on other schemes. We've got quite a few, including Hengrove, where 1,435 homes next door to the Advanced Construction Skills Centre. There's a real opportunity there, and I think we need to make the most of it. With the average age of a construction worker now in late 50s, I believe it is. We need to think about how we bring that next generation through and make sure that the opportunities can be accessed, particularly in deprived parts of the city, where there's been reporting recently in Bristol Live about South Bristol and East Bristol and the outcomes of those kids, and just anything that we can do, I think, to provide more opportunities would be really brilliant to see. I've got a couple more comments, one question, one comment. I think I just make a general observation, sort of from looking at the photos and things like that in the report, that I think the support for Gorum Homes has been very much a cross-party endeavour, it would be fair to say. So it'd be good to see that reflected in the way these reports are written and the photos used. And I think when there are future site visits, can we make sure councillors, certainly from across the Housing Delivery Committee, are all invited to those things. I have to admit, it was slightly grating seeing one of the photos of the two Green Party ward councillors in Lockleys who both objected to the One Lockleys scheme, one of which is now the non-exec director of Gorum Homes. there, and we would have welcomed that opportunity to come and see the work that we put so much time, sweat into to come out there and be able to celebrate that with everyone. So we hope there'll be that cross-party endeavour, and I have raised it before, so hopefully that will be taken on board and actioned. And then lastly, I just wanted to come back to the 39 billion, and I hope that what we will do is look at this as an opportunity to potentially restore some of the council housing pipeline, if it will allow us to do so. Obviously there's work to do to work out what funding we'll be able to access. I think it's 200 council homes, by the way, that are currently coming. I've just taken the bookends and the 147 at One Lot Lees. We need to recognise that there have been sector-wide issues. There is a need to absolutely invest in the existing homes, and there's no disagreement from Labour about the need to get our existing stock sorted. In the HRA, I think a lot of councils have been receiving C3 regulatory judgments, including Brighton, which was Green Run, until May 23. So, it's been a sector-wide issue, and you've been involved in some work, haven't you, about the future of council housing, how we secure that future, because, what we've seen is both councils and housing associations all cut their pipelines to invest that money and redirect it back into existing homes. So it's a sector-wide issue that we do really need to make sure that we grip. So hopefully we'll come up with a plan, because in the speech from Rachel Reeves last week, there were areas of the country named as part of where that investment, including Swindon, and it is a shame Bristol wasn't in among them to be getting named. So hopefully we'll pull, I know we've got that strategic place partnership that Mayor Helen Godwin has signed, so hopefully we'll pull those plans together and we stand ready to work with you cross-party to help do what we can to secure as much grant as we can for the city, but that will rely on you bringing us into those discussions. Thank you.
I think I'll respond to a couple of those questions, because obviously you asked me. Always very keen to see cross-party working on this. I think now we've equalised the number of photographs from every party in the recent business plans. I'm sure we can show them out a bit better for the next business plan version. I think in terms of mentions of Bristol or the west of England, I think this is something the new Metro Mayor, Helen Godwin, has also mentioned about the fact that there was very little mention of Bristol or the west of England. One area that did get mentioned, of course, was Artcliffe. And I think you mentioned about skills, and it is very important to identify the need for skills training. We're facing a massive shortage in the construction industry. If we do want to build these 1.5 million homes across the country, we're facing a shortage that is going to be something like 250,000 too few construction workers in order to deliver those. So identifying people that can go on apprenticeships so they can and complete those apprenticeships, because at the moment across the country there's a close to 50% dropout rate, and I think that is something that we can do working with Gorum and working with others as well. The lot leads has been a big success. I think we've also taught Steve and myself about making sure the skills that are taught are the right ones. Sometimes what is being taught in some other skills centre don't match the skills that are required in the modern construction industry at the moment. Not that I would know too much about it, because my days on building sites are long gone, and definitely weren't modern skills at all. I think in terms of the other areas we're looking at, I think all of us are agreed that we not only need to deliver more housing, but that we need to deliver that housing across the range of tenures. And I think in some instances we have to recognise, some of you know I grew up in council housing, so council housing will always be my preferred option, because it offers those secure tenancies, and also, despite Section 114 notices, councils don't actually go bankrupt. But don't tell Birmingham that, because I'm sort of having enough problems at the moment. So I think there is work that we can do, working cross-party, and I'm always happy to reach out to other members from other parties to get involved in that. And particularly when it comes to the funding for Artcliffe, when we know a bit more about what that's going to be like, what that's going to be directed at, because I have to say the announcement came as a bit of a surprise to all of the local authorities that had neighbourhoods identified. I think what I'd be very keen to do is ensure that we make sure that local people are involved in that decision making, and also that we ensure definitely include the local councillors at the very least in that. But it does also need to be cross-party as well, because we don't know what's going to happen after the next election. As was mentioned earlier, a lot of what's in this business plan is a continuation of what was in the previous business plan, because when we look at providing homes for the city, the homes and the amount of time it takes to provide those homes goes beyond election cycles. So we want to make sure that we get cross-party commitment to what we're trying to do. I'll go back to you first, Tom, and then to Sips.
Just briefly, completely. I think the skills agenda, I just think there's so much opportunity, particularly, with City of Bristol College. We've obviously got the fast track apprenticeships now also being rolled out, so we can get people through those apprenticeship routes quicker as well. So, I just want to make sure that we continue to build on this really good work, because it is excellent. It's the sort of thing that does transform lives and gives young people opportunities. And, we should continue to do as much of that as possible and just make sure we shout about it so that people know about it as well. Because I think sometimes the issue is that, do we really truly reach the people we need to reach when we're advertising schemes like this? And just very, very briefly on Hartcliffe, we really welcome the funding that's come forward. The thing I'd hate to see is it gets frittered away on consultants and other stuff. And I think, we just need to make sure that, as the local councils have already expressed to me, that it really is a local endeavour, that it is locally led, properly locally led. And so, we'd really welcome being part of the discussion and working with local residents, established organisations. There's the Ignite plan underway, as I understand it, that a couple of the Hartcliffe councils have been very involved in as well. So we really want to celebrate and see that opportunity and make sure we also learn any lessons that need to be learned from previous iterations. I think it was Barton Hill had funding in it, I think in the 2000s, and so if there's any learning we can pull through from what went well there and what didn't, I think that would be helpful too.
Yeah, I think there are plenty of lessons to be learned. Fairwood is another area where we probably could learn from what's happened there. Sibs.
Thanks, Chair. I was called to support a resident about 2 weeks ago by our MP, and I really felt for this resident because it resonated quite a lot. They were in temporary accommodation. So looking at the data of our next kind of topic is influencing my question to you, because the person was disabled. They were on a wheelchair. And I'd asked them about how long they'd been on temporary accommodation. It was about 3.5 years. And they'd sent an FOI to the council to find out how many wheelchair accessible homes we've got. And from the FOI, it was something around about 1.69%. So 4 disabled adopted flats, but 1 with a wheelchair. And looking at the report today, your business plan, I don't see a specific target that's set towards disabled homes, mainly towards wheelchair. But the equalities impact assessment that we're going to hear shortly from Paul has got a number there for about 18 wheelchair users and a total of 1,279 people with disabilities. So I wonder if we could, step forward and be a disabled friendly homes and really put a target towards that, because if we can put a target towards that using our equalities impact assessment insights to really design our homes that meets the needs of our community, I think that would be really admirable. Is that something we can aim towards?
So there are already requirements in planning for us to bring that type of accommodation forward, but what I would like to say is that we would like to know as early as we possibly can do about specific people who are in housing need, that we can build homes specifically for those people. I think that what we don't want to do, which I think those of us who have been involved in housing development have seen unfortunately in the past, is homes developed for disabled people that we can't find the right match. And those homes are brought forward at the wrong time, and then they're not specifically used for that purpose, and then they're converted into general accommodation and not taken forward. Specifically, I'm talking about wheelchair accommodation that can be very specific to the individual. So we would like to know as early as we possibly can do with people on the housing waiting list, people that the council are aware of, try and match those needs to that specific home and then be able to build those homes for those people that are in desperate need. So it's about how we can link, and I'm sure Louise will work with us and with the teams in the council to bring forward those specific cases so that we can make sure that they're the right homes for the right people in the future.
Sorry, Chair. So together maybe with Sonia and Paul and housing team, if you can really just reflect on the business plan, and let's put a certain target towards that, and not just an aspiration of place-based, but let's really put some sort of 3% is better than the 1.6% that we have now, or 5% is better, and we can kind of make sure that we can see that within the pipeline of homes we've got set out. Let's be bold and hold ourselves accountable to the public. This is our target. This is our aim. Thanks.
Aman.
I think you make a really important point. When I was running a housing department in a local authority, I noticed that we had about 120 people in temporary accommodation who'd been there for more than 4 or 5 years. And they were all people who had some form of disability which standard accommodation could not provide. You sometimes needed hoists, you needed some form of lifts. So we devised a scheme called Project 120, where we designed bespoke accommodation for the people in the queue, either through the Section 106 developments that were coming through, or through the council house building program to deal with it. And over a period of time, we did that. Unfortunately, of course, what happens is that the minute you house one bunch of people, you have another joining the queue. But that's a system that needs to happen here, which I'm sure it does, but I think it's an important point.
And Sonia.
There we go. Sorry, apologies. Thank you very much. We can certainly provide some information for people on our housing register and indeed current homeless applicants who are in temporary accommodation. I would like to offer some reassurance though around the allocations point. So we do actually have a team called the Making Best Use of Our Homes team who looks specifically at when we have council properties and indeed housing association properties which become ready for relet, that we make best use of those homes which have already had significant investment in terms of completing adaptations. And indeed, both through the Disabled Facilities Grants last year that we administered, we did 178 major adaptations across homes in the city, and within our own housing stock, the HRA funded 362 major adaptations last year and 889 major adaptations. So sometimes when we have applicants who are waiting a really long time, particularly those in temporary accommodation, what we will do is we will take an empty home, consider whether it's suitable for adaptation and make the adaptations before to enable people to move on from temporary accommodation. But obviously hearing someone's been in TA for such a long time is obviously concerning. But we will certainly work with Gorum and some of our other partners to provide additional information around need.
Yeah, we got a van. We organised a van. We got some of the goods inside, and we kind of supported them to find that new home, and they did. So thank you very much to Paul. Thank you very much to yourselves. There clearly is a lot more progress that we can do, and it's really good to hear these positive stories. I'm seeing your LinkedIn. You're putting a lot of those kind of content out there, and I think that's it. We're doing a lot of good, but sometimes people don't see it.
Any more questions or comments? Okay, in that case, I would like to ask or move that the Committee for Strategy and Research approves the 25-26 business plan of Gorum Homes Limited. All those in favour, please raise... Can we have a second? Oh, sorry, can I ask for a seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That's passed unanimously. Thank you. We've got a request for a toilet break, but I'm conscious that we have members of the public gallery who I think are particularly interested in the next two agenda items. So if it's okay with everybody, we're doing the next two agenda items and then take a break for a toilet and other things. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 9, the National Homelessness Property Fund 1, NHPF 1, reinvestment proposal. This report provides an update on the Council's investment in Residences National Homelessness Property Fund 1. The report also seeks approval to roll the Council's existing investment in the fund, currently valued at about £10 million, into the new Evergreen Open-Ended Fund for an initial 5-year period. This is a key decision as it involves spend over $500,000 and has a significant impact on more than 2 wards. I would like to invite Paul Sylvester, Head of Housing Options, to outline the report. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies, I haven't got my name in front of me, but I think most people know who I am. So I'm here today with a report on the National Homelessness Property Fund 1, seeking approval to roll the Council's existing investment in the fund into the new Evergreen Open-Ended Fund for an initial period of 5 years to enable the Council to continue to access a portfolio of 99 private rented properties at local housing allowance for clients who are homeless. This report has been produced, thank you, with significant input from colleagues in finance who have also carried out due diligence on the figures and assumptions, and have also been in several meetings with me and Resonance, the organisation who manages the fund, to bottom out answers to questions and issues raised throughout the decision pathway. So first of all, I'm going to explain how the property fund works, then talk through any issues and with how the fund has been operating, and finally, alternatives to reinvesting in the fund. So in 2015 through to 2017, Bristol City Council invested £10 million in total through 2 investments in a property fund with Resonance. The fund is due to end in December 2025. There were 2 other local authorities in the fund, Milton Keynes and Oxford, and alongside the local authority investment, Resonance secured additional investment from other investors. There was a total of £16 million raised for the Bristol area, and 99 properties in Bristol and on the Bristol fringes were purchased between 2015 and 2017 by Resonance, who also arranged the properties to be refurbished. The majority of the properties are 2-bedroom, there were 79, 14 1-beds and 6 3-bedrooms. The properties are managed by partner organisations. First of all, it was St Mungo's, and now it's our trusted local partner, DHI. And Bristol City Council get exclusive 100% nomination rights to these properties. So the driving factors for the investment were, and still are, around meeting our homelessness and housing pressures and providing good quality accommodation for people to live in. There is also the added benefit of receiving a yield from our investment, which is set out in paragraphs 10 and 11, and in table 1 it shows an estimated yield of £1.7 million over the 10 years. In addition to the yield, there are financial benefits for the council, and that these households would otherwise be in temporary accommodation. These savings are set out in paragraph 28 and 29, with over £100,000 saved each year based on the reletting of properties when clients move on, with the major risk outlined as the cost of temporary accommodation if we decide not to reinvest, which would be up to £1.6 million. There are some additional revenue costs relating to covering voids and delays due to delays in nominations, and the one-off placement fee of £2,700 per placement. These are set out in page 3 in table 2, which shows that the savings on temporary accommodation spend are much higher than the revenue costs incurred. So moving on to how the fund has performed and how many households have benefited from living in these properties. So there are 2 financial aspects of the fund, the yield and the capital appreciation, that need noting and are set out in paragraph 20. The yield started off lower than anticipated at 2%, but did rise to the anticipated 3% by February 2023. Capital appreciation has not been as high as forecast, and our £10 million investment is now at 10.13 million. As you would expect, the reasons for this lower than expected growth have been the subject of many conversations There are three main reasons for this. The initial outlay was stamp duty and high refurbishment costs, but also because this is a fund and we're in it together, the capital appreciation on two-bedroom homes in other areas such as Oxford has poorly performed compared to Bristol, which has had an impact on the fund as a whole. So this has been independently verified and is accurate, and as I mentioned earlier, most of our stock in the fund are two bedrooms. The other main issue to note is the lower than anticipated number of placements. The original model was for households to live in these properties for 2 or 3 years and to be supported to move on into the private rented sector. Paragraphs 16 through to 19 cover this. Clearly, the challenges of a very expensive private rented sector has made move on difficult, which has led to people living in these properties for longer. However, we are still placing 11 households in these properties each year and generating savings on temporary accommodation placements. If we reinvest in the fund, a new nomination agreement will be drawn up with DHI with the aim of working together to increase the number of households who successfully move on. So what are the options? So we either reinvest or we looked at what we could use the capital for in terms of purchasing properties ourselves. Paragraphs 23 to 27 discuss the option of exiting the fund. The key issues of not reinvesting are we would only be able to purchase 33 properties. There is no matched funding available to increase the number of properties we can buy. Properties could be sold with sitting tenants, but this would have a negative impact on the valuation and our capital investment. And it would be a significant impact on clients who may end up in temporary accommodation if properties were sold with vacant possession. There is one risk with reinvesting that, whilst it is very low, needs to be noted. That risk materialises if the other investors in the fund do not invest. This would mean that the number of properties that Bristol would have access to could reduce to a worst case position of 66. We believe this is very unlikely, as residents are in advanced discussions with a major social investor, which is looking very positive. And finally, to note, the longer-term strategy for residents is to grow the fund, attracting longer-term patient capital, acquire more properties, and at some point in the future, potentially allow local authorities to withdraw their capital while still being able to nominate a portfolio of properties. So clearly this outcome cannot be guaranteed, but it's another good reason for us to reinvest in this fund for the next 5 years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Any comments or questions? Tom, and then Patrick. Patrick first, then Tom.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Tom. Thank you for this report. It looks like a really good scheme, and I'll just say right off the bat, I think it looks like exiting it would be a really terrible idea for the council. I was wondering about the options that have been outlined. So it says that residents have proposed two options, option A and option B. Option A is just roll over the fund on more or less current terms, and that includes the slight risk of only securing 2/3 of the portfolio. Option B is to roll over into the new fund with some increased investment, later this year, which would eliminate the risk, and it would also give us the option of using further capital to acquire additional homes around Bristol, which we can then nominate people into and further reduce our temporary accommodation. Why are we not considering that option, please?
Okay, that's a good question, thank you. So in terms of removing the risk of us only having 2/3 of the portfolio, we don't believe that's necessary because we believe that residents are in advance conversations with a social investor, and that will enable us to have access to the full 99. And throughout the decision pathway, it became clear that there is no further capital money that's available to invest in these properties.
Okay, thank you. How much capital would we be talking if if I appreciate we don't have any, but how much would be required for that additional investment, please?
Okay, so as set out in the report, there's no match funding available for any additional investment. So it would be the full cost of buying properties on the open market, whichever properties we'd seek. So quite expensive in Bristol. Yeah.
Tom.
So Councillor McAllister has helpfully asked one of my questions, and I've got a couple of follow-ups to that, because it seems like a bit of a missed opportunity. I think when you say there's no additional fund, I think it's talking about the HRA, isn't it, in this report, in terms of capital, which I'm obviously aware of the pressures there. And there'll be probably legal and technical reasons around this, but things like the local authority housing fund, which there's another round of, could we not use things like that, because that's there for to acquire temporary accommodation, isn't it? And also, aren't we putting significant investment into buying some temporary accommodation through the general fund? So just understanding, can we not put these things in here and leverage in additional investment through potentially Avon LGPS, local government pension scheme, for example?
Yeah, no, good point. Thank you. So the Local Authority Housing Fund and the General Fund Acquisition Programme is for temporary accommodation. So this is about access to accommodation which people live in as their homes. So it's private rented at local housing allowance. And, you know, our view very much is that, and when speaking to residents, that our ability to invest isn't a one-off opportunity. So if we don't do it now, we can do it later. So I think that might be something we may want to consider, depending on how well it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question was, you know, if we say just reinvest now, which obviously absolutely makes sense for us to do, is whether down the line we could. I really would encourage us to look at any potential opportunities that there are. I think residents tagged me on LinkedIn not too long ago. I think they've won an award around the work they've been doing with DHI. So it would be really good to explore any opportunities that there are. And I think whether it's this committee or housing committee, get a report brought there later this year, I think, just to see kind of what potential options could be, including potentially from the general fund as well, because we know it's the general fund that pays out significantly in terms of the costs of temporary accommodation. I think over 13 million that we had in subsidy loss last financial year, give or take. So, you know, anything that we can do to bring more homes online so we can get more people housed in better situations is only going to be a good thing. So it'd be really, really good if we could start to look at that and perhaps look at any borrowing headroom we have in the general fund, and I gather there is some, it may not be very much, to potentially leverage that in, because we know the savings can be quite significant on temporary accommodation, depending on which of the providers we're having to deal with through the framework.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the comment I add to that is the subsidy loss has gone down this year for the first time for a long time, but not by very much. We've still got a long way to go. Sibs.
Chair, I was just going to mention some of that positive news. We heard from Chair Barry Person in terms of the saving subsidies that's been achieved so far from the subsidy loss. And clearly some of these invest to save schemes are working, and they're showing a positive outcome. Again, the scheme could also have a positive of 2 million. So I think it's a worthwhile kind of investment to attempt to. Paul, my only question is that the returns on this scheme, understandably, it's not about the returns, but the returns on this scheme have been significantly less than expected. What can we kind of learn before we move on to the Evergreen scheme that we can make sure there's better returns to support on subsidy losses?
Thank you. Yes, and they have been. So this is where my colleagues in finance and treasury management come into play in terms of looking at forecasting and building in, you know, what guarantees we can into the next fund. Clearly, there's going to be significant legal input before we sign on the dotted line. So we know where we've been, we potentially know where we're going, and I think we'll be in a better position, hopefully, to forecast and then put in any clauses within our arrangements to try and safeguard that investment.
Any more comments or questions, Tom?
Just a clarifying question about the subsidy loss, sort of the average has gone down. I mean, there was a lot of work done around an accommodation framework, wasn't there, that sort of pegged the providers, because there were a couple in particular, I won't obviously name here, that were particularly exploiting us in terms of the amount they were charging for us. So I'm pleased to hear that the subsidy loss has reduced, but just can I check, numbers in temporary accommodation overall, though, are still increasing, aren't they? I think we're over 1,700 households in temporary accommodation. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So the number of people living in temporary accommodation has increased. The rate of increase is is reducing, but in the last financial year, I think we had 100 more households living in temporary accommodation at the end of the year than we started off with. But we spent around about £800,000 less in that year than the previous year because of things like you've just talked about, Councillor Reynard. Yeah.
As you know, Tom, 800,000 is still a drop in the ocean compared to where we need to be. Better than it going up, I agree. Any more questions or comments? Okay, in that case, I would like to move that the Committee for Strategy and Resources authorises the Executive Director of Housing, in consultation with the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee and Director of Finance, to 1. Reinvest the existing investment in NHPF1, currently valued at circa 10 million, into the new Evergreen open-ended fund for an initial 5-year period, and 2. Negotiate and agree the terms of the funding and nominations agreements. Can I ask for a seconder, please?
Seconded.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I ask for all those in favour to raise their hands? That's passed unanimously. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 10, Household Support Fund 7, April 2025 to March 2026. This report seeks approval of the Household Support Fund 7 policy and its £7,120,318 allocation, including change of budget to reflect this funding. The report also asks the committee to note the finance urgent key decision taken in March 2025 to allocate £700,000 to the Council's Local Crisis and Prevention Fund, and in April 2025 to spend £352,500 on free school meals, food vouchers over the May half-term school holidays from this fund. Finally, the report asks the committee to authorise all steps required to accept and spend the remaining £6 million of the extended allocation. This is a key decision as it involves spend over £500,000 and has a significant impact on more than 2 wards. I would like to invite Graham Clapp, Head of Service Revenues and Benefits, to outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. Bit of background to start with then. So last October, the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced in the budget there'll be a further extension of the Household Support Fund for 25-26. So that's the 7th iteration of Household Support Fund. And then in March, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions announced that the national funding for the period April 25 to March 26 for England would be £742 million. So that is effectively £100 million nationally, less than the year before. So what did that mean for Bristol? That meant for us, our reduction in funding for the 25-26 year was £956,612, just under 12%. And our budget reduced from the 24-25 allocation of £8,079,930 to, as has already been said, £7,120,318. Last year, when I presented this, there was quite a strong feeling amongst councillors that we probably hadn't critically analysed the spend, and we tended to do what we did the previous year every year all the way through. So what that led to was the creation of a supporting low-income households task and finish group. Was it a task and finish group? Was it not? That was certainly what I thought it was. And we met 4 times. Some of the councillors here were part of that task and finish group, others were not. And my understanding of the direction of travel of that group was for us to look to try and make, firstly, the best use of the funds that we had available to us, and secondly, to see if there was anything that we'd done previously that we perhaps would be looking either not to do or to do in greater volume. So the decision that we've got, the proposal that we've got, has come largely out of the 4 conversations we had at that group. So just to explain that the amount of money available has to be spent between April 25 and March 26, and the eligibility criteria, which are unchanged from 24-25, are as follows. It can be used to assist households with the cost of food, gas, electricity, water, phone, broadband, essential household items such as white goods, beds and bedding, clothing, baby or sanitary products, and in exceptional circumstances, housing costs. The monies are not ring-fenced to any proportion for any cohort of people. One of the previous allocations, I won't remember which one now, but one certainly said that there was a stipulation a certain amount had to be spent on people of pension age. That was not the case for the 25-26 award. fund can be used to provide supplementary advice services to award recipients, including debt and benefit advice, and as you'll see in the proposed allocation, we've done that. Local authorities need to consider those groups who may or may not have benefited from any recent cost of living support. No application is needed if households requiring assistance can be determined in advance, but each local authority must have, at least in part, an application-based grant provision, and I'll explain where we've got that in the scheme. Individuals, regardless of their immigration status, are eligible to a basic safety net of support, but only when need is in excess of existing aid routes. This cannot be used for mortgage-related costs. The scheme must be adequately advertised. Funding for data collection and analysis and report writing is considered under admin costs. Any publicity material that we use must make it clear that the funding is provided by the UK government, and delivery plans must be signed off by your Section 151 officer and the responsible committee chair before submission to DWP. With regard to the plans, our plan has to be with them by the 30th of May. That sounds interesting, bearing in mind we're at the 16th of June, but we can do a provisional plan. So they're fine with us saying this is what we propose. This is not what's been agreed yet, because it hasn't been agreed yet. So we've squared that one off, so that's absolutely fine and dandy. So I'm just going to trot through what the proposed spend is. So number one, the targeted support for children aged between 2 and 16 plus who receive either free school meals and or pupil premium over school holidays in the financial year for 25-26. So that comes to £3,877,500. That's a £15 voucher per child per week for the May and October 25 and February 26 half terms, and £30 per child for the Christmas 25 and summer and £90 for the summer 2025 holidays. So that works out pretty much 60% of the fund allocated or proposed allocated straight away. I'll explain what we're doing about Easter 26 in a moment, because that's slightly complicated. There's then £700, which has already been approved by previous decision, application to the Local Crisis Prevention Fund. Last year, for those of you around, you may remember, it was half housing HRA, half household support fund. With there being no HRA funds available this year, it's all come from HSF. There's then £100,000 proposal to top up our discretionary housing payment fund. So we get a grant from DWP of, well, this year it's 740k. So that would be an additional £100,000, which will go towards that, which will help to secure tenancies and make people stay in their homes. This item and all the ones rest, the amount that we're proposing this year is less than last year, because obviously we had to make decisions to reduce the fund because we had less money to start with. So there's £150,000 which is going for targeted support to those with no recourse to public funds, including Syrian, Afghan refugees and asylum seekers, and that will be administered by the Red Cross. There's £300,000 going to care leavers and foster children. Then there is an allocation just over £650,052, which is going to Feeding Bristol. So as you'll all be aware, they deal with things such as food banks, food pantries, food supply via fair share. So that's something that we're proposing to support. We're then allocating £190,000 to the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and they, along with the food banks and the advice sector, were the three people that we had presentations from at the Task and Finish group. And that will look to support around 380 vulnerable households who have been negatively impacted by rising energy costs, and look to see what we can do with regard to future-proof their homes. There's £582,266 which has gone to the advice sector in advice grants. And following a conversation with one councillor, we've actually ring-fenced some of that for Bristol Age UK and an amount for WeSIL, so they will get their amounts through that. And also, when we made the decision, which frankly now looks like quite a smart one, not to necessarily ring-fence money for pensioners following the change in the eligibility with regard to the winter fuel payment, it was also said that we would use some of that money to make sure that we target pensioners, particularly later in this year, to make sure that they make applications for pension credit in order to receive the winter fuel payment. £218,000 for admin. usual is 5%. We've cut it down to 3.5%, and included in that is a suggestion from a councillor that was on the task and finish group that we employ a couple of staff for, firstly, benefit maximisation, and secondly, having got benefit maximisation, have the conversation about them if they have council tax liability that they pay their council tax. And that leaves a ring fence of £705,000, which, as I mentioned at the start, Easter 2026 falls just outside of this period, but we are able to include if we wish to do so. It was very much the belief of the Task and Finish group that we supported every single holiday. We don't have surety that we will have the money for next year in order to do so, so we've put that money aside for a decision later this year, I believe, if all things remain equal, and we've analysed the financial settlement to do so. You will also have noticed that the figures don't slightly add up, and the reason that they don't add up is that there was an over-ordering last year of vouchers. So we've got a credit back from Hawke, and what that means is we were able to meet all of the holidays for all of the year, even though the sum looks like it's 7.4 million when we've only got 7.1 million. I think that's about it from me. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Graham. Councillor Blenkinsop, then Councillor Mack.
So thank you, Graham, and I will also extend thanks to Councillor Mack for chairing the Task and Finish group, which I think was, broadly speaking, productive. We've had a lot of good conversations and a lot of robust discussion. We always like that phrase. But what I would say, and this is an area, I've had a few emails on the debt and benefit advice. I imagine a number of councillors have. And I think there is a little bit of confusion around this, so I want to narrow this down. How much? So we've got 582,000. You mentioned that we've had to, or at least we've chosen to decrease this in the due to the spending envelope decreasing. So how much was the debt and or the advice sector as a whole given last year in terms of funding from the Household Support Fund?
From memory, circa 700,000, but I'd have to check.
Okay. I mean, I've got something here that said we had, because we split it up into two chunks, I seem to recall, last year. So it was 400,000 on one and 400,000 on the other. So I think this is a decrease of 200,000 or so, if I've got my maths right. And I'm open to be corrected on that because I've had a number of emails on either side, and I just really want to make that clear that we have decreased the amount that we're giving to the advice sector.
So two responses to that. First, you're absolutely right about the 6-month thing, general election last year. So there was an award from the previous national government for 6 months, and then there was an award from the new government for 6 months. So that was why last year was an unusual year in terms of allocation being in 6-month chunks rather than this, which is an annual award. So you're absolutely right. And yeah, you probably are correct because, as I said before, once you go below the first two items on the list of things that we're allocating funds towards, so once you get beyond the free school meals and the local crisis prevention fund award, everything below that has had a reduction. So I'm happy to supply you with the exact figure, but I'm not disputing what you say.
No, thank you for that, and that's helpful, I think, because I really do want to have clarity when we have this discussion. I mean, we submitted a view as a Labour group that, you know, we have had an increase in local government funding. This particular grant has decreased, but overall there has been an increase in funding. And I think considering the amount of good that comes out of the kinds of things we're funding in this, we do need to look at alternative means to provide that funding if it's not going to come from the Household Support Fund. So again, going back to the debt and benefit, anything on this list, these are all fantastic proposals for those with the very lowest incomes generally, or those in desperate need in the city. So if we can find alternative funding, I think that is something we should prioritise as a committee. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Mack.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this Task and Finish group. I think it was some really valuable work, especially having organisations come in and talk about the work and just the quality of cross-party work in it, where we actually worked together, and it was difficult. And yes, we hadn't really assessed a number of these with copy and pasted a little bit over a number of years, so I think that was really good, although it was largely, you know, actually, the other ideas were thrown in here. It wasn't that we actually started with the same list and came out with the same list. We actually discussed other ideas and came back to this list. Yeah, I think it is a real pity that we are hearing how important this fund is, but the government have decided to cut it, say over a 10% cut. Yes, there in terms of funding to the council from the government, there are different ways of looking at funding, and a lot of it is to do with the demands that we have on our services. And I know that Labour attempted to put in a different version of that statement, saying that we had that was not deemed to be quite correct about how whether or not our services about funding. So in terms of core spending power, we do not have more money to spend at the moment. So it's not like there's money suddenly available for this. And as our finance officer is here gladly, so I'm sure we'll answer any more questions that Labour have on that. But I think that's gone round back and forth already. I think that the thing that's been particularly welcomed by Acorn was actually, I'm going to name the proposal because I think there's been, it was actually Caroline Gooch learning a lot from East Devon, looking at that admin fee and having that money about income maximisation while support with the debt services. So that very specifically is the slight change to how we're spending this money in order to assist people with recognising the benefits when we're working with them from the council. So that is that new item that is being welcomed.
Just to answer Councillor Blenkinsop's question for definite, it was 808,000 last year.
Thank you.
Councillor King.
Thank you. I'd like to have my thanks to the Task and Finish group and to Councillor Matt for chairing. They were broadly very helpful sessions, and there was space made for everyone to contribute. So thank you for that. And I recognise that the HSF, the Household Support Fund, has not matched previous year's fundings. However, I think it's quite a narrow view if we only look at HSF as support mechanisms for low-income households. We've seen some really great proposals come out with the spending review in recent weeks and last week and in recent months as well, with the announcement of the universal credit uplift, free breakfast clubs, the extension of the eligibility for free school meals to all on universal credit, even caps on school uniform prices. All of that will benefit thousands of children in Bristol, as well as the recent announcement of the £1 billion fund for the new Crisis and Resilience Fund, which I believe is the first of its kind to ever have multi-year settlements. And we also locally have our discretionary housing payments and warm homes discounts and other mechanisms of support. And of course, the higher threshold winter fuel allowance now will support a lot of older adults on 35k or less. So all of this will lift people out of poverty. So I just think it's really important to make the point that when we look at support, we're holistic. And we're looking at all the different mechanisms, and it is disappointing to sometimes see this used as a political football when it is a very important issue. But so I just think it's just really important to sort of look at all the ways that we support people on low incomes. On the Crisis and Resilience Fund, Graham, I just wanted to ask, I appreciate it's really newly announced, but has there been any conversations with government yet about how that will work and what it will be like for Bristol?
Be perfectly honest with you, I've only just come back from leave, so I don't know is the honest answer to that one. I would just make a point about the Task and Finish group, though. I didn't see the remit of the Task and Finish group ending with the allocation of the Household Support Fund. I mean, my view is, and Andy and I have had this conversation, there's certainly another conversation to be had at some point about how a local authority approaches local welfare and getting beyond what I think is like a hand-to-mouth every year system. So, I mean, obviously, like all of these things, it all depends on resource, but I would certainly expect at some point, now I've been on holiday, that this group reconvenes or an iteration of it reconvenes and we start to discuss where we're going with regard to that. And I know the other part of that, which might be contentious, is obviously what we do with council tax reduction scheme, because that is another part of the jigsaw. Doesn't mean it will change. It just means there needs to be a debate about that's a big percentage of the funding that we have as a city and how we use that. So I would certainly welcome, as I said, a reconvening of the TFG at some point. And I was going to write to Councillor Mack fairly soon. May have mentioned I've been on leave. So from that point of view, you know, that would be how I would see that. And the point you made about the Resilience Fund would undoubtedly fit into that.
Great, thanks. I've got a few more questions, if that's all right. Just back to a point Councillor Blenkinsop was making about debt advice. We were recently, I think, told that the administration has recently promised additional funding for debt advice, stating it will be voted on this month. Is that referring to this paper, or is it a different paper?
I think that's a difficult question to ask of officers, because I assume you're meaning emails from ACON.
Yeah, I'm happy for you to answer.
Well, I'm not currently meeting or negotiating with ACON, but I do believe that they are referring to what I just explained in terms of those roles that were proposed by Caroline Gooch within the administration fee. What we learned from the work East Devon are doing around benefit support and maximising income through council tax. Remember the report that Caroline shared?
Okay, and so in conjunction with the 582,000 as opposed to the 808,000 that we had in the previous 12 months, does that equate to an uplift in device funding?
My understanding is it's not as much money, no, clearly.
Yeah. So there isn't additional funding.
There's additional funding in that something's been taken from the admin part in order to employ a couple of staff for the remainder of the financial year. So that's additional. But obviously within a 8 million to 7.1 million household support fund, there have been reductions made across everything that isn't free school meals and local crisis prevention fund.
I don't contest that, but so the overall packet for advice and debt funding, is there an increase or not?
Well, it's a smaller sum of money by definition. Yeah.
Right. Okay, it's just good to get clarity on that point, because we've been told that there was an increase in funding, but it feels like it's just a bit's been shifted to a different pot, given a new name. There isn't an increase. Councillor Mack, I don't know if you've got any view on that. Is there an increase in funding?
I'm pretty sure I've heard the answer to that question 5 times now. You have had a campaign email from a campaign group. We're not responsible, go and talk to them about what they mean by that.
I'm interested in your response to it.
No, the money that is being spent on the debt advice service based on the household support fund that has been reduced and cut by the Labour government, similar reduction has happened to the debt advice service in Bristol, which was quite clear from the paper and has now been answered 5 times.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, moving on the task and finish group, I made it quite clear about the importance, I think, the work of Feed in Bristol do to support some of the most vulnerable in the city. They've worked collaboratively with the council for years on food insecurity, but perhaps even more importantly, they work with grassroots community organisations to ensure that we've got affordable, accessible, nutritious and culturally appropriate food for the most vulnerable people in our city. And they really sort of embrace an asset-based approach. So, working with some of our key organisations to help them keep their doors open so that they can deliver food projects and food work with people in the city. And we had a really impactful presentation seeing how they support nurseries in Hartcliffe and 91 ways to build a city in prescribed veg boxes with Lush Greens Market Garden and all these amazing things, Bristol Drugs Projects and so many others, including Hillfields Community Garden in my ward, which I was really pleased to have Councillor Dyer and Nick come and visit last week, and thank you very much for that. So we know that work is really vital and cross-cutting, and it builds that resilience with communities. I'm interested to know how conversations with Feed in Bristol, how their work will be impacted, if we understand yet what the consequences to that decreased package of funding will be.
So they've provided us already with a delivery plan because we gave them an indication that this was likely to be the amount that they would get. Obviously, we're still waiting an official decision. So what they've done is effectively cut their cloth according to the amount of money we've given to provide the best support that they can. I'm happy to share their delivery plan because it's not confidential.
Okay, that would be great. And you mentioned money allocated to support winter fuel allowance recipients. Is that no longer necessary? How is it possible to divert those funds to supporting food work?
No. What I said was we made a decision, or we certainly the feeling of the task and finish group was that looking at areas that we were going to support, the advice people were going to make sure that they pushed in the second half of 25 everyone getting eligibility to pension credit. So I would say it's as important as it ever has been, because it's the passport which gets someone to get winter fuel payment. So we know in the city that there will be a percentage of pensioners who've not claimed pension credit for whatever reason. So as we worked last year actually with Paul's team on housing to try and push to get people to make sure that they claimed pension credit in order to get, so that work will still be, in fact, possibly even more essential, I would argue.
Okay. One more and then I'll shut up. Just on a slightly adjacent issue, on the expansion of the eligibility for free school meals, the additional families that will be able to get that support, do we have an opt-out scheme now for those people, or to ensure that we capture as many of them as possible? Or will you have to do a similar outreach exercise as you're going to have to do with the winter fuel allowance?
That doesn't come in until September 26.
Yeah.
So from our point of view, I would expect, but I will get confirmed, that it will be exactly the same as the current scheme with regard to people would have to opt out in order not to be eligible. Because what we've gone for effectively is auto-enrolment unless you say you don't want to be.
Yeah, great. That's great. Thank you. We've got a really good record for that, so thanks very much. I'll leave it there for now.
No worries. Councillor Bernard.
Thank you. I'll come back to the advice sector funding issue in a moment. I just want to get clarity on that. The local crisis prevention fund, obviously £350,000 of that was funded out of the HRA for the last 3 years, and that was on the basis that roughly half of the 700k was going to council tenants. So obviously that's not being funded from there anymore, but I just want to check. I assume this is the case, that council tenants will still be able to access that local crisis prevention, even though it's not being funded from the HRA anymore.
Absolutely. It's a universal application scheme, and law of averages, probably more people who are our tenants would apply for it than who are not anyway.
That's really helpful and good to know. The 705,000 that's been held back for the potential free school meals over the Easter period, is that the exact amount you anticipate it to cost?
Yes.
Thank you. I like these answers. Very, very clear. So I just want to go back to the advice bit then and just understand. So there's 218,000 for administration, communications and marketing. And I think with these extra roles that have been funded, it would have been helpful if it was separated out separately, just for future. How much of that is for those roles, just to give us an understanding?
70,000.
70,000. Thank you. And the money that was allocated to the advice sector this year and then also previously, were they not doing any income maximisation work for clients?
RAMAS were doing or do benefit maximisation, but what we wanted this to do was the whole suite. So the conversation about you're now eligible to X benefit, and what that means is you've now reached a level whereby you have to make some contribution to your council tax, if you do. So it was more a question, because of the East Devon model, that we looked at something that was holistic, because certainly the impression before it was very much focused on benefit maximisation, which is good, but not on the council tax payment side.
Thank you. All right, and now I just want to return to this advice issue. I found the email received from Acorn very helpful, and props to the work you're doing around bailiffs at the moment. People are in really vulnerable circumstances, and you've been doing a lot to support those individuals that are facing behaviours that they shouldn't be facing. And we really need to crack on with removing the use of bailiffs entirely, if we can, is where we do need to get to. But there is just, I'm just getting conflicting accounts, because part of this email we've had says, you know, we have negotiated with Deputy Council Leader Heather Mack on behalf of Council Leader Tony Dyer, and put forward our members' testimony and demands for protecting Bristolians from ongoing bailiff harassment. In response to our demands, a proposal has been put to Strategy and Resources Committee that includes additional funding for debt advice. So it's not additional funding for debt advice, is it? So either they've misunderstood or they've been misled. And to your point about they're in the room, so I don't know if they want to comment on what their understanding is. I'm sure we can get a microphone if they wish to do so. No pressure to do so, but
Tom,
I'd welcome to hear
this meeting. Acorn Allow, I think they'd be more than happy to chat to you about it after the meeting.
Yes, out of the public eye, of course. Yeah. Well, anyway, that's cleared that up for us. We will be voting to support this funding to go through because we don't get in the way of this being allocated. But we are disappointed that there has been a cut in the funding. And as you brought it up, Councillor Mack, our figures were correct that we put forward in the original query. It was a different understanding, because the figures we quoted of 27 million was from the finance team's own figures that they gave to us during the budget amendment process. I sent the table and also met with the Section 151 officer to run through it. The 23 million figure, I think, is the core spending uplift, but doesn't factor in things, and you may want to comment, Andy, around extended producer responsibility income and a bunch of other things. The 27 million figure we refer to is the increase based on the assumptions the council had net versus the previous year. I think it was where we landed, but please clarify me if I've got that wrong. I think the point is there was additional funding, and politics is about choices, and the funding could have been topped up so that we weren't having to cut what is really essential funding. And I hope what we'll look to do is try and find a way to find additional money so we can make sure it's getting to those in need it, and we'll make sure that if things have been told to groups that aren't quite accurate, that will be clarified. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Andy to come back first, and then Councillor Mack.
Okay. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Reynard. Yeah, it was helpful to talk through the numbers, and you're correct in terms of, you know, there's lots of movement when we set the budget, and there has been additional funding. I think we also discussed there has been significant additional cost in running the council, and I think our final figures were around £75 million of additional growth requirement to run the council, and our total core spending power movement, if we do factor in business rates and council tax, which was already planned for, was around 43.8 million. So, you know, there's a gap in funding always, and that's why we have a savings plan of around 42 million pounds. So, you know, I would appreciate there was movement in grant funding. Many of those grants also do fund core services like adult social care and children's social care. So that's where the demand has been channelled.
Councillor Mack.
Yeah, I'm just checking, because as I say, I haven't been in direct communication, but I'm checking what I've shared with the group, just to be clear, because I think it's important that we don't start making accusations in any direction about, sometimes things can be misworded rather than anything malicious intended. So very specifically what was communicated was additional, well, exactly as me and Graham are communicating. That might have been translated, you know, there's that difference between increased funding on debt advice. So we've gone round on that, but I think it was mistaken communication from, well, how am I trying to say this? We very specifically communicated what was planned in terms of those additional roles within our team, not specifically additional increased money for debt advice.
Councillor McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. I actually think Councillor Shabalala was first.
Wow, I'm just looking at this report, and it's such an enabling kind of fund. Thank you. It's really, really great. You know, traveling around with 3 children in the summertime, you know, funds like these make quite a significant difference. So really glad that this has kind of come through. And I'm just quite optimistic in terms of, you know, you reduce the admin fee so that you can add a bit more. But I'm just wondering what would be the impact of really drawing out on all this impact on all the joint kind of delivery partners, because this is so many amazing stories could come from here. Is there kind of joint up report or impact reports from the previous fund, and what are we trying to do next time to really measure the impact this has? Because I see it as an enabler. You know, if someone's going to get food, you can have the confidence, you can, you know, be full again to do the next activity and do the next activity, do the next activity. So how are we really capturing how this is making a difference?
That's a really good question. And I think, to be honest, that was what councillors, and I can't really remember which councillors it was last year, were saying that we weren't doing really. We were sort of, not robotically, but we were awarding the same amount to the same people. So the purpose of one of the purposes of the Task and Finish group, and one of the reasons we had the presentations from the 3 groups that we did, the food bank people, the Centre for Sustainable Energy and the advice sector, was specifically to capture that. Now, I know you weren't a part of that TFG, but certainly I've still got those presentations, which I'm more than happy to share, which will give you some of the background that certainly Councillor Key and Councillor Blenkinsop and Councillor Mack would have had from those groups. And the next bit, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but we need to know first that there will be a fund for 26-27 before we know what we're going to do, which hence my point about the Task and Finish group coming on to what does the city do with regard to local welfare, and how do we make that a part of what we do. So hopefully I've answered your question, but there is some really strong, important evidence that we've got because of the presentations that we had at the TFG. So that's number 1. Number 2, we need in the Task and Finish group going forward to start to have these conversations about what are we going to attempt to achieve depending on the funding envelope. And then, assuming there is a 26-27, I would propose that we do something broadly similar, so that, you know, if we make decisions on allocations next year, we do it again on evidence base, on hearing from the people that we've given some of the funds to and how they've used it.
I'd say, you know, it's really important to have a marketing budget, because that's how you get things to the public. What would be really good to kind of see with that is a journey map, maybe in terms of if you're situation A, you can get A, B, C, D kind of thing, so you can really visualize what is accessible. We've just had the good news, obviously, about the free transport travel for summer, which is, you know, kind of joining these things up. You know, people can really see what they can do and where they need to kind of, you know, think about the money that they need to spend to get to other activities. But if you just get an email or a newsletter that's just got all these things, sometimes we have to think about people's ability to just really get the full information in a simple, clear way so that they can see the difference that all these decisions are making.
Okay, thank you. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask a sort of broader question about how we are planning for the future with this fund, please? So have we considered how demographic changes or changes like the government's cuts to disability benefits, which are going through at the moment, might impact how we might want to distribute this funding in the future? Is that something we're planning for now, or will that come in the future? Thanks.
I think, frankly, we need an indication first that there'll be a fund to allocate, because until we've got an idea as to whether there will be a 26-27, and I've not seen anything, and if people have, great, but I've not seen anything anywhere which says for certain that there is. And then it's, I think, back to what I said previously, if we're going to have local welfare locally that we either fund or we support, how we make that responsive to the city we've got and its impact on changes that have happened.
Thank you very much. Also, Chair, I think I share the disappointment of a lot of people that this funding has been cut from the government, and it's sad that the council, having to deal with the huge black hole we were left by the previous administration, hasn't had the resources to fill it. I think we can all get behind that. We would like this money to be more, and it's unfortunate that we don't have the resources left to us that we were able to fill it, as some people might like to suggest we did.
Okay, I think we're coming to a natural close. Tom, I know you want to respond to that immediate point, but unless you've got a question, I'm going to speak, but go on quickly.
So you say you hadn't had any indication. I think what would be useful, it's more of an ask to take away, is just to get that clarified with the relevant contacts at the civil service about what they are or aren't intending. So obviously the one thing I am cognizant of is we're very likely to be getting a 3-year, multi-year settlement from the government, hopefully earlier than Christmas week, which would be nice, wouldn't it? So it would be useful to kind of just track and understand what's happening around that, so that we can then do some of our planning. I won't get into a back and forth about financial black holes and things, but just point out that the majority of that projected hole was to do with children's social care placement, 17 million of the 22, because the amount of kids that are having to go out of area, and you did vote down a budget amendment that would have created more children's homes in area to save on some of that money. So just FYI, let's not throw any more stones.
Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Reynard. So what we are definitely looking for from government around the 3-year spending review, once we get the detail, I think we need the detail around allocations, is a ongoing and sustainable funding package, and we will be definitely representing Bristol and working with core cities around the local demand and the use of this funding as well, so we can make best use to support our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. I think my final comment is going to be from the House of Commons Library, which is about the local government finance settlement for 25-26, which has been at the source of much of this conversation. The quote I'm going to give you is that the real terms increase of 4.3% in core spending power in the settlement for 25-26 is largely in line with the increases of the past few years. However, as this has not yet made up for the large falls in core spending power in the first half of the 2010s. As of 25-26, the library estimates that core spending power remains at 9% below its 2010-2011 level in real terms. So there is a lot of ways we can spend this money. We could probably find very good ways to spend double this amount of money. The underlying problem we have was we have been in austerity, and at the moment we are still in austerity, and until austerity ends, we're still struggling to provide people with the lifestyles and the opportunities that they need and they require. So we can talk a lot about where the money should be spent, but the simple reality is, at the moment, there is simply not enough money to go around. And I hope that this multi-year settlement and this new government will recognise that. There are some things being announced. There are also some things that are being announced that are less positive news. I am not going to rush to judgment. I'm going to wait until we get further details from MCHLG and from the Deputy Prime Minister and from the Treasury. But we are going to be facing still yet more difficult times ahead based on the information we've been given so far. And as that information becomes available, then yes, we will be sharing that information cross-party so that everybody is aware of the underlying figures so that we can make decisions based on evidence. On that note, I am going to move that we approve the Household Support Fund Policy 7, April 2025, March 2026, and to change the budget to reflect this funding as outlined in this report. To authorise the Director of Finance, in consultation with the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee, to take all steps required to accept and spend, including procuring and awarding contracts over 500,000, for the 7.1 million of the extended allocation of the DWP Household Support Fund, as outlined in Household Support Fund 7 Policy, April 25 to March 2026, and up to the maximum budget envelope outlined in this report. Can I ask for a seconder for that?
Seconded.
Can I ask for all those in favour, please, to show your hands? That's passed unanimously. We also are asked to note the finance... We're also asked to note the finance urgent key decisions taken in March 2025 to allocate 700,000 to the Council's Local Crisis and Prevention Fund, and in April 2025 to spend 352,500 on free school meals, food vouchers over the May half-terms school holidays from this fund. Can I take that as noted? Okay, thank you. We do have a couple more items, but I'm conscious that a few people want to take a quick break. So it is now 4:15. 10 minutes enough for everybody? So come back at 25 past. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now move on to agenda item 11, which is the quarterly performance report for Q4 2024-2025. This report provides an update on performance against the Bristol City Council business plan for Q4 24-25. The report is for information only, and I'd like to invite Nick Smith, Strategic Intelligence and Performance Manager, to outline the report. Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as I said, it's the year-end report for the year that finished at the end of March against the business plan as was. So, as is always the case, there's a summary report that highlights the overarching aspect against all the metrics and actions and outcomes within the business plan. 83% of the actions were met or on track to be where they needed to be. It was at under half, 42% of the priority metrics met target during the year, and just under half, 46% of the city outcomes were improved on the previous year. Within that, then, the rest of the report is focusing on the metrics specific just to the remit of the Strategy and Resources Committee, where in the summary report, and of course, as is always the case, there's the links to the two appendices, the Appendix A1, which is the dashboard with all the details in for everything, and then Appendix A2, which is everything specific for Strategy and Resources with all the detailed comments against each metric and action. The cover report highlights some of the ones that didn't do well, and some of the ones that did do well, both for metrics and actions. Ones of particular note include FOIs, where it was significantly worse than target. These are looking at the reds, but it is still better than it has been for a number of years. So a lot of positives, even within the negatives there. Very similar story with the breach during the procurement process. Significantly worse than target, but significantly better than previous year. That's been the story all year with those. The consultation response one is noted there. That is slightly worse. Well, it's worse than target, which is why it's here, but it's slightly worse than it had been. But conversely, that is partly due to the overall success of the last two major consultations, and in particular the waste options one, where the volume of responses was absolutely huge, which is fabulous. But it did mean that watered down the work to try and get the balanced responses from the least deprived areas as well. And then the gender pay gap is also noted, as that has widened significantly compared to the previous year. But that is very much sensitive to small numbers of movements in senior roles. And some of the positives that are worth noting there, percentage of agreed management actions implemented within agreed timelines. The best outcome here for 10 years, as noted, significantly better than target. I know that had been behind target in the previous few quarters, so that had been brought up and questioned, quite rightly so, at the previous meetings. So it's excellent that the additional work done in Q4 did deliver the required improvement. Also noting the agreed savings after application of the optimism bias as noted, it amounted to all of them, although there is further detail given in the comments. And then also the number of visitors to Bristol museums did achieve target in the year, so that's an excellent positive there as well, and a note on young people in the council's workforce. And then there's some examples of actions, the three that were behind schedule, and selection of some of the ones that were above. I'll stop there for comments and questions.
Thank you, Nick. Any questions or comments? Tom B.
So thank you very much, and I agree there's some excellent progress being made here, and I will ask some slightly more negative questions. I do want to say there's some really nice things here. I will briefly channel Councillor Logan in saying the procurement is, great to see progress on that, and as you've highlighted, it's really good to hear on the management actions as well. But unfortunately, there is a but. When it comes to the FOI responses, I would like to ask a little bit of detail. So which services are struggling to provide FOI requests or to answer FOI requests?
In terms of the exact specifics, we, to be honest, we'd have to go away and request that from the individual services. In Q3, because this came up then, and we did notice it was children education where the majority of the struggling was, but I'd have to confirm that was still the case in Q4.
If you could confirm, that would be great, because I think this is an ongoing problem that has led to, how do I phrase this gently, aspersions that have been made about the council's integrity in some areas, and I think that's something we would like to address urgently. One small point.
Sorry, Tom, could I just jump in there? It's, in terms of, I'm trying to think the right way to phrase it. So is it a number in requests in terms of the percentage that children or services are having problems with, or is it that they get significantly more FOI requests in other areas? Is that something that we can look at? Because what I'm thinking, sometimes if one service is getting a lot of FOIs, that might be part of the problem, and we maybe need to address it, look at why they're getting a lot of FOI requests.
Sure, that would certainly be in the data. Obviously, the figure here is purely the proportion that are completed on time, and doesn't look in of itself at the number and the volume of different services, but that will be within the data, so we could provide that.
Right, sorry, Tom.
No, it's a very fair point, so thank you for raising that, because, yes, it's important we have that perspective. But just to note on the increase in percentage of young people, that's a great progress on that. And I note that through targeted promotion of entry-level jobs. I might be asking a slightly unfair question, but again, something to take away in terms of that data. One complaint I've had from younger members of younger relatives and their friends, at the very least, is that entry-level jobs are being advertised without entry-level expectations, if you like. And I would like to ask, more or less, when we are advertising for those entry-level jobs, are we ensuring that they are in a position for young people, young graduates, and not, you know, being given demands that these young people couldn't realistically meet? So I just wanted to check on that as well.
Hi, sorry, I don't have a name plate, but I'm Rebecca Baldwin-Cantello, Head of Equality Data and Performance. So we can pass that on in the development of the new workforce strategy. That would probably be the place where this sits the best. So I'll pass that on to our Director of Workforce and Change.
I mean, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So yeah, that's all from me.
Thanks, Tom. Tom.
Sat navs are back in fashion. So I just wanted to thank you. It's very helpful, very comprehensive. I just wanted to ask a question about forward-looking, actually, and just where are we in the target setting process for this year? That's my first question. I'll have some follow-ups.
Yes, we've got a. So we're going through with each division at the moment to look at what do we retain of what there currently is, and then the next phase will be we've just started having sessions with the Corporate Leadership Board on the new performance framework, with the ambition that that is delivered in autumn time. So we're not currently reporting on Q1 while we develop the metrics. To then we'll pick up reporting again for Q2. So I'm hoping all councillors are aware of that, because we wrote to say that the first quarter there won't be reporting, but apart from essential areas, and then we'll pick up again in Q2 with the new sets of metrics.
Yeah, because it'll take time to move across to a new set of metrics. I think what would be really helpful, which committee it goes to, I'm not sure all of them, and probably none of them, it would be really helpful to see very transparently which metrics are being dropped, which are being kept, and which are being added, and for that to be really clear by policy committee. I think that'd be really helpful just to see. I think we want to know what is still being tracked and what isn't, and there may well be views on that as well. I'm obviously aware you'll be aligning that to the corporate strategy, which is obviously a slimmed down document, but I think it is important that we understand, because there may be questions about how some of this stuff is still monitored, because there might be things that don't naturally fit in a corporate plan, but actually we still need to make sure that we're picking up and reporting on, sort of more business day to day, but still maybe of interest to some councils anyway. I love going through the dashboard. It may not be everyone's vibe. So that was my sort of general ones. And then I think I just wanted to dive into housing. So it is very unfortunate that housing people have left. So I just wanted to ask about affordable housing delivery. So I just wanted to check I've got the correct understanding. So there were 535 new affordable homes completed last financial year. over a target of 650. I understood that correctly? Yeah. I'm looking at the city outcome measures, if that helps, on how homes and housing delivery.
I thought the number was slightly higher, but we can double check for that. I thought
Okay.
607 had been delivered last year, but I'll double check.
Well, it was 23. Yeah, that was the 23-24 figure. It'd be helpful to know what exactly the figure is. And then there was a couple of questions within that. What was the 100-unit scheme that slipped? Just more being. I appreciate it may not be able to answer now unless you know, Councillor Dyer. And then I was interested to understand. So it says, of the 535, 305 delivered by registered providers and other partners, and then 230 by the council. So in the council figure of 230, does that include Gorum Homes, ones that we as the HRA are taking?
Just to clarify the first 2 points. First of all, the figure is 535 of the affordable homes delivered, which is 82% of the target that had been set internally. But that is in the detailed report going to the Homes and Housing Delivery Board. So this is why it's not in the pack for this one, but you're quite right, it is in the appendix, in the full dashboard.
Yeah, the head of housing delivery was here, unfortunately, so it's a shame. But anyway, so, okay, well, it'd be useful to kind of understand a bit more of that, because I think what I'm noting here is that 43% of affordable homes delivered last financial year were council homes. And I think regardless of the current challenges there might be with existing stock, what it highlights to me is how important it is that we're maximising all routes for delivery. Yes, working with registered providers, but also making sure we're bringing forward our own stock as well. And I think, really need to make sure we seize the opportunity that will come with that 39 billion package for the affordable housing delivery plan. So it'd be useful to have a bit more detail. I'll obviously look out for the report when it goes to Housing Committee. It's not one I sit on, but it'd be useful to know and understand, what factors have affected the missing of the target, how the target was set, what the target will be. This year, I'm assuming we'll still be setting an affordable housing target for future years. So it'd be useful to kind of really understand and get into the detail of that. And are there things we can do to accelerate sites, do more on acquisitions, because we know that's something that can bring more affordable homes forward. So I appreciate a lot of this can't be answered now, but it'd be useful if it could be taken away. I would like written responses to these questions, if that's okay, rather than just having to wait for the Housing Delivery Committee report. Would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
I think what I also add to that is, don't forget, we're also acquiring some properties under the General Fund, and if everything goes well, and the HRA is back on its feet, we could look at acquiring them into the HRA account.
They're still council-owned as well, technically, albeit in the general fund, yeah?
They're council-owned, but in the general fund, so I don't know whether they're being counted within that figure, so we can find that out as well.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for bringing this report. It's really good to read the progress that's being made in a lot of areas. I want to actually specifically flag for praise the work that's been done towards reaching savings delivery targets. That's from a low base, but to have come so far is really good progress. It sets us up very well for the future, and that actually might be one of the most important things that's come through in this report. And similarly, the increase and improvements in the collections for council tax, although there is more work to be done there. These are fundamental to everything that the council does, so thank you for this level of detail we've had. The question I had, please, was around BPPM 512 and 513, which are the gender and race pay gaps, please. I just want to check, is that an overall pay gap or for the council, or is this between comparable roles? And I'd also like to seek assurance, because my understanding, and I'm not an expert in the area, but if we're paying men and women or people of different ethnic backgrounds differently for the same role and the same hours, then my understanding is the council would be in breach of the law. So could I just get an assurance that that's not the case, I'm hoping, please? Or is this just a pay gap for average earnings across the organisation, which we need to address through our hiring practices and so on? Yes, absolutely. It is the latter. It's just taking the total amount paid and splitting it by the different equality breakdowns of the individuals. It's not people being paid a different amount for the same job. Thank you. That is reassuring. And I think I'll just also flag the welcome improvements with the racial pay gap that have been flagged here as well. So thank you for that reassurance.
Any more questions or comments?
Yeah, I think the stats about the consultations actually really tell a story, and a story that we need to work cross-party on, in making sure that we can engage our residents in more deprived wards in having their voices heard. And I wonder, in terms of here, all councillors, obviously we've also got a number of consultation, and one of those is the home choice consultation. It'd be really good to kind of see a cross-party collaboration on really making sure that people get their voice heard on this, and sharing that as much as possible, just the same as what we've seen with the waste consultation. But just wanted to check on the offices. What do you think can be done to really increase that level of engagement from residents that currently don't engage as much? What would you kind of put forward as suggestions or recommendations to kind of really increase levels of engagement in our consultations?
I think our colleagues in the consultation and engagement team would not want us to be putting across our professional opinions on that, but we can pass that across to them. I know that they have been. This metric has been a struggle for a long time, and they have invested a lot in really trying to make a difference there. So I think it's more looking at what has had an impact and what hasn't across the range of things that they've tried, rather than it being not a broad diversity of things that they have tried, if that makes sense.
And if I could just add, purely from a data perspective, I think that what we're seeing with the figures now isn't that people aren't engaging, it's that because of the last couple of consultations, there was such a strong response from across the council, across the city rather, that it diluted the positive responses from the underdeveloped, underrepresented groups that the service had been targeting. So, if you like, the metric is bad for a good reason, because there was such a strong response from the other areas.
Also, I think we did have you mentioned about home choice, we did have the big housing conversation a few years ago. And we put a lot of work into, cross-party work into trying to get as many people to respond to that as possible. Hopefully we can try and do something similar for the home choice consultation, but there is a big role that councillors can play in this as well, because often councillors have the ability to talk to their residents in different ways, whether it be by putting items in their local microsites where they go on. But I think we're also aware that some parts of the city don't have the same type of opportunities to put information out as some other sites do. I'm lucky in Southfield, I think we have 2 or 3 different magazines that we can put information in, but if you go out to some other areas of the city and there's barely anything. So I think we just need to bear in mind that maybe what we need to look at is doing that additional focus on those areas where there aren't easy ways to put the information out. Ellie, I think, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to go back to the point on gender and ethnicity pay gap, because I'm not reassured. I think, whilst I can understand the rationale for the explanation, rather, that it's positions of seniority explaining the disparity, that fills me with dismay. And in the words of this, that pay gap has widened significantly compared to last year, deserves some real focus and some urgent attention. Could you just please outline to me what the approach being taken is to rectify this and take some positive action, please?
Again, I think you'd probably want to ask that question to the Director of Workforce and Change, but I do know that they are actively picking this up as part of the workforce strategy, and we were talking about this before. I think it's possible that one will change within the next quarter again, but we'd need to just verify that with them, because this is based on the previous quarter, so I think some of the work that they've done on appointments will help there as well.
Ellie, I think Nick wants to come in as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to reassure you that we are actively discussing what steps we need to take as part of the action plan for the new workforce strategy that will be coming forward shortly, and that's included talking to our staff-led groups particularly in relation to addressing underrepresentation in terms of the diversity of the workforce, which should also in turn have an impact upon the race pay gap, for example. So we're actively looking at that. We do want to co-produce the actions, and I do see it as an area that we need to focus on.
I think the other thing I'll quickly add to that is, I don't know, it probably is in the numbers, is looking at our workforce, there are clearly some areas where we, compared to the city as a whole, where we're quite a bit below, and one of those areas is young people, which kind of goes to Tom's point that he raised earlier, Tom B, about making sure that where there are opportunities available for young people, that we do make sure that that's presented in such a way that it encourages young people to, or younger people to put themselves forward to work at the council. And in this case, by younger people, obviously with my age, everybody under 40 is young, but I mean, we're talking up to about 30, I think, or something like that. Tom, did you?
Yes. I just wanted to actually come back on that first, actually, and it'd be really interesting to see kind of how the HR sort of workforce strategy, I'm aware it's imminent, isn't it, to the HR committee moves forward. And I think the one thing that we as Labour councillors have consistently flagged is also around parental leave and making sure that those policies are properly reviewed, both for staff and for councillors, so that we are looking at the local government association, the best practice that they outline, which I don't think we're currently in step with, because we know that that can have a significant impact about where, sort of from a workforce perspective, where people choose to work. We'd really welcome that being picked up in more detail and having some confidence around timelines. I have had this conversation with Steph and also James in the HR team, so I know they are listening. So I'm not saying that nothing's being done around it, but I think we just need to have a bit more accountability around how that's going to be taken forward. And it's, I think, particularly on my mind for a whole host of reasons, not least being a very young dad to two kids. So I think that's the first thing that I just wanted to touch on. And the second thing I have now forgotten. So perhaps Nick, if he's going to come in, I can hopefully remember my other point.
Yeah, just to say that we have picked up on your representations about parental leave policy. What I would say is the workforce strategy itself won't cover the detail of that, but we will be able to set out what steps we're taking to review any policies. Yeah.
Question.
I do, and thank you. I think it's the timelines really, because I'm obviously aware that a lot more detail fall outside of the strategy. I think the other thing I just wanted to come back to was engagement and consultations and how we get more people to respond. Obviously, if controversial topics, which, as we know, waste collection is one that the citizens of the city are very, very, very passionate about, then that can obviously drive response rates. I think the other thing we need to also be mindful of, and I think the big housing conversation is a good example, right, where we did work cross-party. There was a cross-party reference group that I set up. There were workshops run for all councillors to attend of all parties. There were workshops run for housing staff to attend, for tenants to attend. It was quite an intensive bit of work, but I think really worth it in terms of what that then delivered. And similarly with the home choice review that we previously did, again, there was cross-party working group there, and I think I am coming to sort of the nub of the point. The other thing that is going to affect whether people respond to consultations is, can they have confidence that then their feedback is taken on board? Where it is not taken on board, do we explain sufficiently why we're not able to do things? Because we're not going to be able to always do everything that we hear about. And I think where home choice is concerned, I think that is quite important, because there were a whole set of changes that were taken through Cabinet early 23. And I've recently flagged some questions to the Housing Department about, well, what's happening with the implementation of some of those policy changes? Because if those don't happen, and then you put more changes out to consultation, they go, well, what's the point in responding? Because actually the previous ones weren't done. So we just need to make sure that we are sort of doing that you said we did, and resourcing that effectively and getting that out to the city. But I think if the home choice stuff could be picked up outside of here, I'd be really grateful, because I'd like to understand what's happened. It's because I've had some cases sort of come via me around how homelessness duties are being treated and things like that. So I welcome the opportunity to pick that up.
Yeah, I think the council has not always been at its strongest in the past in terms of responding to points that have been raised in consultation, so it is something we do need to do some work on. If there are no more comments or questions, okay, as I mentioned before, this report is for information only. I just want to identify that the Strategy and Resources Policy, or ask the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee to note the performance against the business plan overall, including the theme summary reports and issues raised and measures to address performance to be well implemented by relevant services. And that Strategy and Resources Policy Committee also notes the performance against the effective development organisation theme in particular, including issues raised and measures to address performance issues to be implemented by relevant services. So can I ask that that report be so noted? Thank you. Almost there. Agenda item number 12 is operational assets disposal. Now, a couple of things on here. One of the items listed, the address is exempt. Just to clarify, the reason why that address is exempt is for safeguarding issues, depending on what the decision of the Strategy and Resources Committee decides. There is some exempt information, particularly about valuations and so on. And if members of the committee want to discuss those, we would need to go into exempt session. I'm happy for us to start the meeting now in public session, but if councillors are clear that we're going to need to go into exempt session, we probably should do that as soon as possible after we do some public session. Tom.
Can I just flag that I don't actually have access to the exempt item on ModGov, so I haven't been able to review that information. It just says exempt at the end of the paperwork. So document is restricted.
You're on the public section, therefore.
Yeah, that's fine, but I'll just flag that. And also I just want to say thank you that I certainly understand the children's home, isn't it, that they're potentially looking at, so I understand why that's restricted, but thank you that the other two are listed publicly, and this is something we've been calling for. So hopefully going forward, you know, as far as possible, we'll see the names of public assets due for disposal as under the old kind of Labour system, you know, does come forward to the committee so that the public do at least understand, even if a lot of the commercial has to be discussed behind the scenes, to understand that, you know, there is that transparency. And I do hope that although the vote went the way it did on the Gorum Homes delegation today, that if there are any changes to the pipeline, that those are at least reported for transparency, if not brought here for a vote. Thank you.
No problem with that. I mean, I think that remains the case, that except when it's commercial reasons or a very clear reason for why information is kept exempt, it should be in the public domain. And that's what we intend to do. So what I'm going to do is, this report asks the committee to consider the future of free, surplus and vacant assets. This is a key decision as it involves spend over 500,000 and has a significant impact on more than 2 wards. As mentioned, the report contains an exempt appendix, Appendix E, which includes commercially sensitive information. If members wish to ask questions about or discuss the content of Appendix E, it would be necessary for the committee to go into exempt session. However, the decision itself will be taken in public. I'd like to invite Pete Anderson, Director of Infrastructure, Property and Assets, to outline the report. Pete.
Thanks, Chair. As the Chair outlined, so these are related to 3 operational assets that have been returned or highlighted back to property services that they are deemed surplus. So in accordance with our processes through the Estate Strategy Board, which we brought to a previous committee, we've entered into a surplus process, which enables us to engage with, and as point 5 of the report, colleagues in housing, Gorum Homes, City Leap, adults, children's services and education, to see whether these assets could be repurposed to hopefully identify a greater service need that potentially would realise revenue savings rather than disposing and seeking capital receipt. So we entered into the surplus process, and of these 3 assets, one asset, the 146 Grosvenor Road, as detailed in point 6, there was no interest at all across the surplus process. It is a vacant asset, and we believe that in relation to the condition of the asset, we recommend for it to be disposed via open market. via auction. The asset 5 Ways bungalow, we have worked closely with our adult care colleagues and believe that our best route here is to dispose to via a registered provider, stroke investor, to enable us to repurpose that asset to support people who would be in need of specialist support, particularly linked to additional needs in adult care. And that would potentially generate a saving of 160k per year, so approximately 40,000 of savings of costs for one individual times by 4, so that would be to repurpose for 4 people. And the third asset, which is, as you say, Chair, is not named, and is potentially to be repurposed for use of children's services, which potentially could create savings of, it says in the report, 600k per year. The average cost for a child who is from in this particular service, potentially up to £400,000 a year. It's costing us to for the cost of care. So that would be a property for 3 people or 3 children. So that's significant costs of savings. So not a capital receipt. So of the 3, we estimate that we would seek a capital receipt of approximately 500, as detailed in the report, but potentially savings of nearly 760, if not more, thousand per year.
Okay, thank you, Pete. And just to be clear, so of the 3 properties, we've decided not to dispose of one. It's going to stay in children's services. Potentially, we've decided, so I didn't want to preempt your decision. And of the other 2, the capital receipts will be able to be invested in the transformation programme, so they could go into children's services, adult social care, temporary accommodation, one of those key areas that we're looking to invest to save.
Yeah, the report details in point 3 in relation to the council approved budget with generating the capital receipts of 45 million. So the need to dispose of assets to realise that income is what is part of this process.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Patrick?
Thank you very much for this report. Firstly, I've just got 2 questions, please. Firstly, on the St Paul's property, please. Could I just check, why do you think there haven't been any proposals coming forward for either internal use or for a registered provider? We've seen from the other, the bungalow, that there is appetite among registered providers for taking on properties in poorer condition and then using them for housing or supported living. It's a large property in a really good location. I'm just wondering why can you assure us that we did actually go and try and get internal uses or RP uses before we resorted to auctioning it? Thanks.
I can reassure you, we did speak to all of the service leads in those areas. The condition of the building is significantly poor, so that investment needed to bring that back into use and then to convert into a use was deemed not viable. So that was a response back that we received across those the different services as previously mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I suppose I just note, I suppose that will reduce the amount we might be able to expect to get for it at auction, but then we don't have the ongoing revenue costs of maintaining it. And okay, thank you. And on the property that we are maintaining, the exempt one, I noted that the funding to convert that to its desired use will be funded through the Reprofiling Children's Homes project budget, which has got 1.2 million, and the conversion of this one property will cost £850,000, which is most of that money. Does that risk leaving the budget under-resourced for any future projects we might have, please?
So that funding, the 1.1, is ring-fenced for this property. So it's part of an Invest to Save bid that has been secured as part of the process for Invest to Save. And through this process, this property is identified to use that money. So yes, if not all of that is needed, then yes, it can be reinvested, or part of that in surplus within that capital space, but it was ring fenced as a project for the for them.
Thank you. So we're hoping to have an underspend of 350,000. It looks like. Great. Thank
Correct.
you very much.
Yeah.
That's good news.
I wouldn't count that underspend at 350,000 yet. Tom?
I'm not sure whether this falls into exempt or not, so I'll ask it, and then you can. It's to do with the Grosvenor Road property, if that helps. It's not to do with the children's home.
So to avoid any getting into trouble, so we go into exempt session, or?
So I'm going to ask about what's the revenue costs, your holding costs. That is in the exempt report, but not a clear figure, so I don't know if that needs to be dealt with in exempt. And I'd be interested to understand a bit more about what appraisals were actually carried out of the property, to understand what the costs are of bringing it back into use as housing or other things. So I don't know where those questions sit. Sorry to be awkward.
Yeah. Are you okay to answer that, or do we need to go into exempt session?
We can go into exempt. We follow the process. We haven't got an exact figure in terms of the actual thousands of holding costs to incur, but it would be as defined in the exempt paper. There's a breakdown, but not per amount. So we haven't defined that in the exempt paper.
So assuming I'm looking at the correct exempt paper, which I won't describe, it would seem that there is not exact costings in here.
There isn't exact costings in that paper, no.
Yeah. So I'd like to know what they are.
Yeah, we can get those in the context of, but following the surplus process, that building was identified that it wasn't viable to continue. We don't believe it's viable to continue. Need a significant condition survey. But in terms of the holding costs, we can get that information for you.
I guess the problem for Tom is that without that information, he may not feel able to vote on how we proceed.
Well, I don't think we've got the relevant financial information in front of us to be able to vote on the item, and all relevant financial information as part of good decision making in the council, and the principles of good decision making should be provided that's relevant to a decision. And we've had this debate before on property disposals, so it's just a bit frustrating. We seem sort of going back round the houses on it, is all. Obviously, I couldn't make the agenda briefing because it was scheduled at the same time as the Economy and Skills Policy Committee a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I think we better move into exempt session to see if we can find a way to resolve this. So I am going to propose that the committee moves into exempt session. So I therefore propose that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the next item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A of the Act. Can I have a seconder for that?
Seconded.
All those in favour, please raise your hands. That's unanimous. So rather than chuck people out, we're going to move into a separate room. Okay, so... Okay, thank you, members and officers. So we are now back in public session to make a decision regarding the properties for disposal. So I would like to move for Strategy and Resources Committee that, one, we defer the sale on the open market of 146 Grosvenor Road, St Paul's, until we have further information as requested. Two, that we approve that 5 Ways Bungalow be sold at market value to a registered provider to enable the delivery of supported housing. 3, we approve that officers progress to produce a business case for the use of the exempt asset in exempt Appendix E and report back to the Estates Strategy Board to seek approval of the business case and proceed with a proposal to repurpose the asset. And 4, authorise the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration, in consultation with the Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee, to take all steps required to dispose of the asset identified and, subject to business case approval, repurpose the exempt asset and return the first item, 146 Grosvenor Road, back to Strategy and Resources, including entering into any necessary legal agreements and additional information as set out in this report. Can I have a seconder for that?
Seconded.
Can I ask all those in favour to raise their hands? That's passed unanimously. Okay, we now move on to the final item, which is an additional urgent item of business. I have agreed in accordance with a Constitution Law APR 16 access to information procedures, along with the Vice Chair, the Monitoring Officer and Section 151 Finance Officer. Now, an urgent item of business can be considered at this meeting. The urgent item is a report about fundraising and bidding for the acquisition of an oil painting, The Rising Squall, Hot Wales, by JMW Turner for Bristol Museum and Art Gallery collections. The report has been published alongside the agenda papers for this meeting. The reason for the urgency is that the announcement of the sale of the painting at auction only came to light via a press release on 8th of June, with a sale date of the 2nd of July 2025. This fell after the publication of the most recent committee forward plan, and the date of the next committee meeting in July falls after the date of the sale. Time is required to mount a fundraising campaign in order to be able to secure the funds required to bid, and this needs to be known and confirmed by 1st July at the latest. The report contains an exempt appendix, Appendix E, which includes commercially sensitive information. If members wish to ask questions about or discuss the content of Appendix E, it will be necessary for the committee to go into exempt session. The decision itself will be taken in public. I'd like to invite Phil Walker, Head of Culture, to outline the urgent report. Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. So this item is a request for committee to agree to fundraise, auction at bid at auction and purchase a painting by the artist JMW Turner, The Rising Squall. This painting is of Hot Wells, area of the city, near the Clifton Suspension Bridge, was painted in 1792 and was first exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1793, when the artist was only 17 years old, and it's believed to be his first major painting in oils. Appendix 1 shows the image. Appendix 2 shows the conservation report that was commissioned by Sotheby's for the purposes of the auction. And Appendix 3 shows the auction details. And it shows the painting shows what a talented artist he was already by the age of 17. And it also has incredibly strong relevance to Bristol. And it'd be hard to imagine another artist or another painting that was any more relevant to the city's stories. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to purchase a significant work of art by such a significant great master artist. The Sotheby sale, as mentioned, is on the 2nd of July, a little over 2 weeks' time. There's more detail in the paper, so I won't go into the history of it. I've probably covered it enough. But just to say that The intention is that the council wouldn't spend its own funds on this. This would be entirely raised through alternative sources of funding, but the council would be the purchaser of the painting if successful at the auction. And I think that's enough to just by way of introduction. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Councillor Gillanders.
Thank you, Philip. Great report, and it's a fantastic opportunity. As you say, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to acquire a painting by a very famous artist of Bristol. So I think it's very exciting, and I think we're all very excited by that. But just want to press you on this one point so there's absolutely no shadow of doubt. You say it's going to be acquired through fundraising. You've only got a narrow window for that. Obviously, the council's finances are extraordinarily tight, and I'm not sure we could afford to just purchase a turner like that. Can you give us an absolutely categoric assurance that if we purchase this painting, it will be wholly through funded finance, not the council's finances?
Yes, I can. So the intention is to raise funds from, if subject to the committee's approval, to progress for immediately, and raise funds within the next 2 weeks, which will then, prior to the auction, we will have confirmed amount that we know that we could possibly bid for, and all of that will be sought from external funding from outside the council. The council, as I said, will be the one that actually makes the transaction if it's successful, so it will pay for the painting, and we won't have necessarily taken all of the money in, but we'll have cast iron either contracts or we'll have commitments through public campaign or through trusts and foundations that we may approach.
Thanks, Phil. I wish you very well with the fundraising. It'd be great to have a picture.
Thank you.
Ellie.
Thank you. My question is a little bit adjacent to that one. So I'm just interested, I don't know what the costs of maintaining a painting like this, of this quality, of this importance, over its lifetime. I'm just wondering about the costs of that, because I'm assuming that will become a business as usual part of the museum's maintenance work to keep that painting in good condition. So I appreciate the initial fundraising for the purchase is being paid for elsewhere, but I just would like to understand what the ongoing consequences to the council's coffers are, set in the context of it being a really brilliant painting and quite an exciting opportunity.
Thank you. Yes, so there is one of the appendix shows the conservation report, which is reassuring. So that's been done by an independent evaluation of the current state of the painting. So we know the painting to be in a good and stable condition. It would become, you're right, it would become business as usual to look after paintings that we acquire into our collections. In order to do that, we keep environmental controls very strict within certain parameters within our museums, both in the areas of display and also in our storage areas if it were not on display. And we have that same commitment to every item and any item that we hold within our collection that we look after that. There wouldn't be any significant differences to the long-term maintenance of this. We would most likely undertake our own conservation assessment at some point. We may need to glaze the painting if it is not glazed in order to protect it and add additional layers of protection, such as exposure to UV or ultraviolet or other sources, dust, etc. So it's standard practice to glaze paintings if they're not already in a glazed frame. In terms of the costs, it wouldn't be significant change to that. The only possible change would be that we would add it to our insurance policy for our museum collections. That shouldn't materially alter the costs of that insurance policy, but we would have to add it to that insurance policy, and we'd have to speak to our insurance broker on whether that does actually materially change the costs. But that again, it's a cover-all policy, so it of quite a high valuation of the city's collection. So I don't think it would materially change that.
Thank you for that. That was really helpful. So in terms of doing our own assessment, I don't understand how these things work generally, but the assessment that's been done of its condition, is it is that very likely to adhere to the same assessment that your team would do? I'm assuming. Is there ever significant variance between those?
There are within the conservation report. There are some suggestions that further work could be done to investigate it, but it provides us reassurance that it's in a stable enough condition. So we would take it our own view. We have an in-house expert conservator who would be able to look at it and be able to tell very quickly whether or not there was anything more we needed to do. But we take reassurance from Sotheby's assessment. So Sotheby's would have appointed some reputable and thorough assessment. So we're pretty convinced by their assessment at this stage.
And there is an opportunity to do that ahead of purchase. That's not the done thing, no? Okay.
No.
Thanks.
Patrick.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for this report. I agree with the points raised by the councils preceding me. It's good we're not spending our own money, and it's good to get the reassurance about ongoing costs. Now, being careful not to point to any figures that aren't in the public domain, how this looks like it could be a very expensive painting. Is it realistic that we could get it? If that is something which can be discussed outside of exam session.
I wouldn't have brought this to the committee if I didn't believe it was possible to put in a bid for the painting.
And as always with all these things, there are no guarantees. I think my question is, if we were to successfully, well, the fund raising was successful and we ended up with this painting, presumably we'll be looking to do some promotion of it to attract more people to the museum it's going to be displayed in. Now, hopefully, would we charge for that? Would that be done separately?
So the intention would be to put it on display as quickly as possible in the Bristol Museum and Art Gallery without charging for that. I think particularly if we have just mounted a public fundraising campaign, we wouldn't be wanting to charge a second time for people to access that. That's not to say that we wouldn't in future have special exhibitions with it where there may be a charge that is made for people to see it, but that would probably be part of a broader show. There is something to note is that there is a request from the Tate to display this painting at a significant show later in the year, and we would be keen to honour that commitment if we were the owner of the painting at the time. But the intention would be to bring it to Bristol, put it on display as soon as possible to the public, free of charge, and then at a later date see whether there are opportunities for other situations of displaying it.
So following up on that, and obviously the painting was painted in the Georgian period, and we have a Georgian house, we're trying desperately to get more people to go and visit. Is there any potential for us to look at perhaps displaying it in the Georgian house?
We will look into that, Councillor Dyer. I won't make a commitment at this point if that's okay.
Thanks, Phil. Any more questions? Sibs?
Phil, thanks for this. I think, just thinking outside of this painting, I'm assuming we've got quite a considerable stock of artwork, right? I'd be quite interested to understand the diversity of art that's been collected over time, because art generates great value and appreciation of those artists. And how are we using that purchasing power, may say, or display opportunity of artists to really resemble the city in terms of diversity? And how do we make those intentional kind of purchases? Let's take this as an example, to really diversify our stock that resembles the city and make sure that our museums are inclusive and represent wider arts collection.
Thank you for that question. So we have a number of ways of doing that. In terms of programme, we constantly try to achieve that through programming activity at our museums and our sites. We also actively seek to look at areas of our collections which are less representative or underrepresented. So an example of our current exhibition, Gender Stories, at Bristol Museum and Art Gallery, is where we're working with LGBTQ plus communities in order to address previous underrepresentation. We also actively seek to find ways to address the colonial origins of the museum collections as a whole. So we have artists that we commission to look at our collections through different lenses. An example of that is the Jessica Ashman exhibition, currently also at Bristol Museum and Art Gallery, and we hope to acquire works from artists that are working in that way, not only to address the imbalance, the lack of representation over many generations, but also it's good practice in order to commission artists, contemporary artists as well. So we do it through a number of ways. But we recognise there's more work to be done in that. Just in response to your question around purchasing power, we don't have a purchasing budget, so we rely heavily on loans or gifts, and we always have to seek additional external sources of funding in order to make acquisitions to the collection. So it's a slow process, but it's one that is articulated in our collections policy, which is up for renewal, and we will be addressing how do we ensure that our collections policy does exactly what you are suggesting, more proactively in future.
Okay, thank you. I feel we may have strayed away from talking about the JMW Turner painting, but it is a topic.
Apologies, Chair.
Discussed further. So, any more comments or questions? Okay, in that case, I am going to move a motion for the Committee for Strategy and Resources to approve a public fundraising campaign to raise funds towards the acquisition of the painting, approve the purchase of the painting subject to receipt of sufficient donations and funds, and authorise the Executive Director of Growth and Regeneration to appoint an authorised representative to bid at auction up to the approved amount, take into account all associated costs of auction, including auction fees and premium, transportation and courier fees, and spending donations and funds as outlined in the report. Can I ask for a seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, that was the last item on the agenda. Thank you for your time and your patience. Apologies that we overran. And I'll see you, if not before, I'll see you at the next Strategy and Resources Committee meeting.